fuel.
Okay, members, can I remind you that this meeting will be recorded and ask you to note that mobile phones should be switched off as they interfere with the recording. Tablet devices should be switched to mute. I remind members to declare their interest as appropriate throughout the meeting. Can I declare the meeting open to the public? Agenda item 1, have we any apologies? No apologies. Agenda item 2, chairperson's business. Can I advise members that it is customary to issue an electronic Christmas card each year to people, organisations and officials who have presented to the committee over the year. Pages 5 to 8 contain the image of the Christmas card and details of those people who it will issue to. Our members are content with the e-card to issue. Members?
Yeah.
I advise members that an effective questioning session for members is scheduled for the new year, possibly in February, March. Our members content that the clerk seeks a date with the provider for this training. The facilitator will be Kate Bargar, who recently completed more in-depth training with the Health Committee. She will also be working with the Regional Development and Education Committee in the new year. Okay.
Great.
Agenda item 3, minutes of the meeting 25th of November 2014. Can I refer members to the draft minutes of the meetings on the 25th of November 2014 at pages 10 to 14. Are members content that the draft minutes are accurate?
Great.
If so, I will say. Agenda item 4, matters arising. Can I refer members to matters arising at pages 15 to 36? Can I draw members' attention to the letter at page 18, which is a reply to farmers for action regarding the legal advice the committee has received. Members will recall that this was discussed at the meeting last week, and it was agreed that the clerk would draft a reply and bring it back for members' approval today. Members happy with that response? Yes. Everyone see that? Okay. Can I draw members' attention to page 25 and from Darden reference to the tagging cross compliance, and that's page 25. There's an issue whereby in Northern Ireland we have a quite tight regime in regard to cross compliance, whereby the maximum amount of tags is 20. And they're irrespective of the size of the herd. If you've over 20 missing tags, you're then in the cross-compliance penalty. When we look at other areas of the UK, in particular Scotland, on page 27, the threshold for Scotland is 16% of missing tags, which
Seems more sensible.
much more sensible and much more, yeah. I suggest that the committee should write to the Minister on this issue, and maybe Stella could word it in a way that we have concerns on the tagging issue in regard to cross compliance. I think it's unfair and unbalanced.
Generally, with like a pro rata basis.
Yes. Yes, because at the end of the day, you're allowed 20 tags. Well, it means if you have 100 animals, you're still allowed 20 tags. I mean, if you have 500 animals, you understand it's not pro rata. So the Vice Chair is absolutely right. Okay? Mm-hmm. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. Members content action. The remaining matters arising suggested in the index sheet on pages 16 to 17. Okay, members? Agenda item 5, order briefing, raise anti-poverty and social inclusion, rural deprivation. Can refer members to the research paper at page 38-48. And can I welcome Member Research Officer Mark Allen? Mark, give up to 10 minutes to give your presentation. Okay, Mark?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. And I'm conscious that the expert, maybe your more expert voice in this is coming after me. So what I have tried to do in the paper that I've given you is to give an overview really of, I suppose, the types of deprivation measurement tools that are in use across the UK and the Republic of Ireland. I suppose the key issue really in terms of that we're looking at, or that has maybe driven the development of such indices, is really the need for government to ensure that it maximises the positive impact of finite financial resources. It was a very telling situation as well in our current budgetary process as well. I suppose there really is that aspiration a lot of governments hold that all of society, their benefits are at least not disadvantaged by government policy. And that's led, I suppose, governments really to explore how they generate baseline data as to the situation and circumstances that people find themselves in, as well as them being able to actually track the impacts. I suppose the development of the measures that we're talking about really, and I suppose there's a conceptual framework and a starting point really. On page 29 of the paper, table 1 there, I've really set out for you what effectively the definition of understanding of deprivation is within each of the UK territories and within the Republic of Ireland. I suppose the general thing to say here, and I think it's an important point to make at this point, is that there is a consensus that deprivation has a wider definition than the financial constraints of poverty. So these two issues sometimes are used interchangeably, but the reality is that that may not be the best use of either. There needs to be, I suppose, a recognition across all of the territory. I think it is recognised that deprivation deals with issues relating to a lack of resources or access or inability or a lack of opportunity to access resources. So you could effectively find yourself in a situation where you're unable to escape your circumstances. Now that mightn't be financial poverty, but it's undoubtedly leaving you in an impoverished state, that you're not able to better yourself or improve yourself. So that's really the context. What I have done then in table 2, which is pages 40 to 44, which is the bulk of the paper, is I've really set out the key features of the deprivation measures used in each of the territories, Northern Ireland being first. I don't want to go into a great deal of detail on these. Suffice to say that I've probably looked at it, maybe I'll give you some of the commonalities and some of the differences at a UK and Republic of Ireland level. In a UK context, I think the first thing to say is that the approach taken in the 4 constituent nations is broadly similar in terms of methodology. That's probably not much of a shock, given it was the Social Disadvantaged Research Centre at the University of Oxford which really designed and contributed to the methodologies employed, so that they've a common author in that regard. The other thing to recognise is that all of the mechanisms employ so-called domain areas, and they have associated indicator sets that they use to build a picture of deprivation within those. It's also possible to look at individual domains, and for all of them you can also generate an overall multiple deprivation score, which members will be well aware of in relation to super output areas. I'm sure many of you could rhyme off where the areas in your constituency rank in a multiple deprivation score. There are differences, I suppose, in relation to the number of domains and indicators. Northern Ireland has 7 domains, 56 indicators. England has 7 domains, 38 indicators. Scotland has 7 and 38 as well. And Wales has 8 domains and 35 indicators. Those domain areas are then allocated a weight to generate this multiple deprivation score. I think that one of the things that I do want to flag maybe at this point, and it's worth noting, is that the domain areas dealing with access to services across all of the jurisdictions. And I have to say it's one of the areas a lot of stakeholders will say, from a rural standpoint, is one that they feel is significant. Those have some of the lowest weightings in relation to the multiple deprivation score generation. Northern Ireland is 10%, England it's 9.3%, Scotland it's 9%, and Wales it's 10%. There's also a significant difference across the UK jurisdictions in relation to the geographical unit for which data is available. And I suppose this is within the context that it is generally accepted that the smaller the unit for which data is available, the greater the likelihood of identifying more dispersed deprivation. It has often identified rural communities. That's no guarantee that you will, however, but it's more likely to give you a more accurate picture. The other thing to say on this is that Northern Ireland, actually in UK terms, we actually have our data available down to the smallest area out of the UK jurisdictions. That's output area level. Each output area in Northern Ireland has an approximate population of 350 people, and no other jurisdiction within the UK has data available down to that level within their primary index. ACRE have, for example, in rural England, done work down to a similar or smaller level, but it's not within their primary documentation as produced by their equivalent to our local NISRA. Turning to rural-specific data, again, within the actual main reports I'm talking here, Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales do have rural-specific data within their multiple deprivation measure reports. Within Northern Ireland, we have our headline data. Within Scotland, it's individual domain area data by a rural-urban split. And Wales actually provides a breakdown in terms of local authorities. So they have rural local authorities and they provide that distinction. They have the information available. There are no such provisions, however, within the English indices document. Turning then to actual rural-specific guidance for use. I have to say, when I looked at this, it seems that Scotland seems to be unique in having published standalone rural-specific guidance. I mean, it's referenced in the paper, but the Scots have looked at, how best to really look at a number of domain areas in relation to rural deprivation, how to measure that. We don't see that in relation to Northern Ireland or Scotland or Wales, England or Wales. The other thing, I suppose, that maybe the catch-all, maybe in the get-out-of-jail card in that relationship, however, is that the fact that all of the UK jurisdictions have developed general guidelines for how to and how not to use their deprivation documentation. I suppose there are caveats for use, and the main ones which you pick up consistently are that there needs to be an appropriate use of cut-off points for the most deprived. The fact that deprivation measures identify the relative level of deprivation in an area rather than the number or location of deprived individuals, I think that's a key one. And the third one being that the value of using index data in conjunction with additional information sources. So this isn't the only show in town. There is a value in using other statistics, or in fact, even qualitative data, for example, could have a value in terms of being able to identify the true nature of a circumstance. The other one I just want to mention at this point as well is that the situation in Wales. Oxford Consultants for Social Inclusion, OCSI, actually did a piece of work there on behalf of the Welsh Local Government Association, Rural Forum, and that really looked at how best or how can you measure rural deprivation. That was paper was published in 2012, and really, I suppose, explored the merits or otherwise of developing a specific rural Welsh index for multiple deprivation and trying to identify what indicators might be appropriate. That work didn't make any specific recommendation for development of a rural-specific index, but it did highlight a number of particular resource allocation issues in Wales that rural areas needed to consider. First things being that programme funds for vulnerable people should not be targeted to deprived areas. This is, again, it's almost built on that previous point. Just because it's not a deprived area does not mean that there could be deprived people within it. Secondly, direct measures of client group needs should generally be used rather than overall deprivation indices to really focus in on who it is you're trying to benefit. Cost due to sparsity and distant economies of scale should be adequately included because it does cost more to deliver services in rural areas and to target people. And finally, use clear and transparent methodology with sufficient time for robust consultation. That's really where I want to leave the UK stuff. I want to give you just a flavour maybe for what has happened down south, but full recognition of the fact that Troots is better qualified to speak on that. So in simple terms, the approach taken down south is actually very different to what's used here in the rest of the UK. The key distinctions are these. The Republic of Ireland Index utilises census data. They have their census every 5 years as opposed to 10 for us. And it also takes a confirmatory factor analysis approach as opposed to UK measures which rely on administrative data and take an exploratory factor analysis approach. In simple terms, the approach that they use down south as confirmatory factor analysis really tests a predefined model. So, for example, is rural deprivation, you could say, is made up of the following features. So it tests that. Our approach taken in Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK is exploratory, in the sense that we develop a model based on the data rather than seeking to apply a model, or rather than seeking to apply a predefined model. The index down south uses 14 indicators across the so-called 3 dimensions of affluence and disadvantage. And data down south is also available down to small areas. That's a standardised unit. It's a minimum of 50 households and an average of just under 100. I think the important thing to say, and I have no doubt Troots maybe will touch upon this, is that the context of the measurement of rural deprivation. Troots and his colleague Dr. Jonathan Pratt, who developed this piece of work, really they're very key in their assertion that the approach they have taken is significant, and I quote here, it achieves a balanced measure of deprivation across the urban-rural spectrum. all other published deprivation indexes or indices are subject to urban bias to the extent that they fail to take account for the nature of rural deprivation. In that context, I suppose it's not surprising that there isn't really any rural-specific guidance produced to accompany, because, as I said, the premise is this measure doesn't effectively discriminate against rural areas. That's the premise. The other thing to say, I suppose, and I think this paper was written largely in September, and I think there have been developments since then, which I think Tritz will touch on now. This work is applicable through the work that Tritz and his colleagues have done for an all-island of Ireland deprivation index for small areas. And I suppose the time I had been writing this, they were actually in the process of trying to gather the information. I think as of last week that information has now come together, so he may well be in a position to give you more of an update. The final thing that I just want to say is, just in closing, is to maybe just give a summary of some of the key maybe considerations. And this is really, I suppose, in general terms relating to the use of multiple deprivation measures. First thing I think I want to emphasise again, I said earlier, there is a distinction between poverty and deprivation, and that's a critical issue. Whilst those who produce these indexes of deprivation or indices are clear in this distinction, and it pains to stress it, I think it is fair to ask if this understanding or appreciation exists amongst the users of the measures. I think the second thing I want to say is, regardless of the methodology or approach employed in the creation of deprivation indices, there are clearly caveats for their usage and application. This reality needs to be borne in mind by all users of the indices. And as a practical outworking, any potential users probably should consult with the producers of the index prior to usage. In summary, what I'm really saying there is any measure of deprivation is only as good as the people who use it and the purpose to which they put it. The third thing I want to say is, whilst the authors, and it builds upon the previous points, whilst the authors of indexes are clear in their analysis and associated guidance for how best to use the measures, there is no means of guaranteeing that a government agency or department, funder or other will take account of and act on this information. And I suppose I would cite the example, how appropriate is it to use the arbitrary cut-off point, for example, of the top 20% of multiple deprivation. So I suppose it's almost like the people produce, but those who use it aren't bound, and what I have seen, to actually use it in the way in which it was designed, or the caveats need to be taken on board. I also think it's important to say that deprivation indices cannot and should not be used as the only means of identifying particular needs or justifying particular support in particular areas. Indices often only really provide a relative picture of deprivation in a particular area, so they're not the only show in town. Just two more points. Firstly, the rural sensitivity of deprivation indices. I think that's a recognised challenge across all territories where these are utilised, given the acceptance that dispersed rural populations make the identification of multiple deprivation harder than it would be in urban areas. There are different approaches, as I've touched upon. I think the question really here is around the guidance that we provide. Do we provide guidance for rural areas, or for the use of indexes in rural areas? Do we have a measure similar to what's used down south which tries to take account of this? And it also raises questions around the appropriateness or the challenges or the merits of developing a specific rural multiple deprivation measure. And the final thing I want to say is this. In Northern Ireland, there do appear to be grounds for further development of specific rural guidance for the use of the Northern Ireland multiple deprivation measure that could follow the template of that produced in Scotland. I think there could also be value in building upon the work of organisations like ACRE in England to try and produce maybe specific supplementary reports for particular rural areas. And the reason I say that is I think that too often we get into a situation where we're comparing rural against urban. And rather than doing that, there might be actually greater value in actually focusing on the particular challenges within a rural area at a local level of geography. That's all I want to say at this point, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much for your presentation. Mark, if there's one thing that government departments or agencies could do to improve the situation, what do you think that would be or should be?
I think I would emphasise again my point. I think it's the application of the mechanisms. Whilst people will have debate around the value of the measures themselves, I think it's the actual use is a critical issue here. And I think in that regard, some departments could provide more of a rationale for why they have used them in particular ways, or to maybe take account of the impact of using a particular measure in a particular way. I mean, the one I can remember offhand from previous experience, neighbourhood renewal, and the top 20% of, I think it was wards at the time, multiple deprivation measure. That led to effectively neighbourhood renewal money being targeted to really quite a small number of areas, and there were areas where there could have been other cases made, but for the fact there was that arbitrary cut-off point, top 20%. So it's the application, I think, is a critical question.
Okay. Oliver McMullen.
Yes, thanks, Mark, once again for a very comprehensive report. I would agree with you, it's not the only show in town. Fuel poverty is a big thing. Rural transport's a big thing. All of those there all add into this deprivation levels. But one thing that's not in the report there, I was looking at it, and the use of postcodes. I still use postcodes as an indication of deprivation areas. And you still have this scenario where you have one side of the street deprived and the other side of the street not deprived. That comes out of the child minding and all of that there, where one side can get the grants and the other side of the street can't. It's totally, in this day and age, that has never been dealt with. And the rural white paper is not mentioned in here at all. And I think it should be, because if every department is signed up to the rural white paper and the guidelines is inside it, I would love to know how the other departments are dealing with the rural white paper, and indeed how many of their decisions are rural proofed. I think that has to be part of an indication as well. Rural proofing. That's part of rural proofing. This thing comes up all the time. We see in front of us today, for example, that one department has cut the budget to health and safety in the farm. That's rural proofing, and it's still it's going against the rural white paper. So I think we need to be getting back to that rural white paper in a way, and making sure departments are adhering to what's inside it. The Mara project, will go back to it, because it really can set out a lot of deprivation, a lot of what's happening in the rural areas. And I think that the matrix is there for a good part of other departments too in the past. I think they didn't know how to deal with the rural area.
Have you a question, Oliver?
I was just getting around to that now, Chair. You burst my bubble.
Swallowing that rural approval.
In the report, it does say here, we do compare the rural areas with the urban areas.
Yes.
And I think that's wrong.
Yes.
I think we need to be comparing rural areas with the rural areas and what's going on inside the rural areas.
Yes.
Because you have said quite rightly that deprivation is in there, and we're not looking at all deprivation levels. And that's at the end of your report, where it does say in there that which rather than comparing rural areas to the urban counterparts, we actually should focus on the particular challenges within the rural area. And I think that's what we should be doing there.
Yeah, and I think
Thanks, Chair.
just to build on your point, Oliver, just in relation very quickly to the Mara project, I think that actually highlights maybe one of the weaknesses of deprivation indices, in the sense that you could ask the very legitimate question for beneficiaries of the Mara project. You know, these are dispersed people across the rural area. You may well look at a multiple deprivation score for that area, and that area may not register. But there are clearly people within that area who have been able to access benefits which have undoubtedly improved their life and their quality of life. So I suppose it highlights, one of the dangers again of using, as I said, a measure, and solely that measure. Local intelligence there on the ground, and people actually knowing who was maybe in need, was actually able to provide supplementary information to ensure that resources were targeted. So.
Okay. Ron Dobson.
Thanks, Chair Mark. Thank you for your briefing. Super as ever, and very easy to follow. We obviously look at deprivation in Northern Ireland in terms of the statistics on the NINS website, and you spoke about how this information varies in other regions. You spoke about Scotland as standalone with regard how it measures
The guidance.
And you've touched on Wales as well. Is there any other detail you can tell us how this information is collected and presented differently from other jurisdictions? Because what you may classify as a deprived in one area in the UK may not be here or vice versa. So that's
No, I think
how
that's,
do you get the broader picture?
I think the challenge that Joanna is, and I think it's the individual measures and the individual jurisdictions are for that jurisdiction. They're not directly comparable.
Okay.
And I suppose that's the key thing to bear in mind there. I think there is a challenge there in terms of how transferable that is. That's maybe where I suppose maybe Truth's is maybe I suppose emphasis maybe on an all Island or all Ireland approach is interesting, I suppose, in that ability to do that, maybe utilising census data or whatever. I think there are challenges there as to what you can actually compare. I think the overwhelming sense you get, I suppose, looking at Northern Ireland is there are areas, I suppose, under a multiple deprivation score which score higher. Does that mean, as I said to Oliver, that means that everybody in there is deprived? No. Does it equally mean that an area that doesn't register has no deprived people? No, it doesn't mean that either. It's a relative score we're talking here, and I think this is one of the difficulties.
It's quite.
I mean, I suppose the fundamental challenge government faces, as I said, is it needs to have a mechanism to allocate resources. And it's not a criticism of the mechanisms, it's maybe just a criticism of how they're applied. And what the implication is through that application.
So is it easier to be classified as deprived in different regions of the UK? You know, what we might, with an area in Wales might say is deprived, with us might be totally
I think I'm reluctant to go down that line because I say that they're standalone measures, but I mean, as I said, they have a common author. So you have the main areas are broadly, and I say that very caveat, broadly similar, but maybe weightings that are allocated are in terms of the data that is derived from them. I think what we didn't look at, but there might be merit in looking going forward, is how different departments in each jurisdiction apply the mechanisms that they have to actually allocate resources. I mean, the Welsh one was a particularly interesting one in the sense that they really seized upon this concept of, do we need a rural multiple deprivation measure for Wales? Now, as I said, there's no definitive conclusion to that, because A, it would be a lot of work, and what value are you actually bringing? I don't know, but it maybe lends that approach more to what Oliver's talking about, that you don't keep comparing rural to urban, you simply look at rural in its entirety. But there can be criticisms of that as well.
Here we quoted, wrote it down, if you go over it, only as good as, was it the people that produce it and how they use it?
Yes.
That's quite apt, I think.
Well, I think it's trying to, I mean, I'm being generous in that. I think you need to have a mechanism to measure, but as I say, the question is how you do it and what rationale you can provide for how you've used it. And there can be questions, and I mean, you've heard them as previous stakeholders come up, there have been questions around how certain uses have been put to the multiple deprivation mechanism.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay, John. Go, Born.
Thanks, Chairman. Again, thanks, Mark, for the paper that poses questions. In relation to the measurement of the multiple deprivation index, in Northern Ireland we have a higher level of home ownership than there would be anywhere else in the UK. And within the north itself, there was also a higher percentage of home ownership in the rural areas.
Yep.
How much does the home ownership factor influence or distort the index?
To be honest, as I sit here now, I can't actually recall, because it wasn't actually something I looked at on the auspices of this paper, but it's something, I mean, if you want us, we can look at. I'm very happy to come back at. I mean, I remember when I looked at it in some previous employment, and it would have been actually around probably the 2005 measure. The big point at that time was that 50% of the multiple deprivation measure was actually benefit uptake derived in terms of the income and employment domain. I mean, so I remember at that time there were a number of measures that particularly attracted attention of particular stakeholders, but I suppose I'm perfectly happy to go back and look at the home ownership issue and see, does that bring a disproportionate impact in terms of those areas that register.
I appreciate that, because the problem with home ownership is you can be asset rich, disposable income poor,
Absolutely.
which can greatly affect someone's daily living standard. Second point, in relation to the CFA or the EFA, in Northern Ireland, you've declared here that it would depend on the 10-year census, and then it's published data. Is that government or public sector owned data that is relied upon to compile the...
No, our index is actually based on administrative data.
And that comes from where?
It's from the departments.
Yeah, so it's government, publicly owned data.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chairman.
Okay, Tom Elliott.
Chair, thank you, and thanks, Mark. Excuse me. Your issue around And I think you were talking about the ROI stuff, that it doesn't discriminate against rural areas versus urban areas. And I know,
That's the assertion, I suppose, and it's a...
yeah, and I know Oliver McMullen picked that point up as well, that rural should be measured against rural. I don't necessarily agree with that, actually. Because if you look at so much of the aspects of the multiple deprivation measures here, for example, access to services, well, naturally you're going to have much less access to services in rural areas, and you'll always score higher. Now, you could question the scoring mechanism.
Yes. And the weighting allocated.
Yeah, and the weighting allocated. But I certainly, Chair, would not be content with just assessing rural against rural. No harm, only having a different point of view, Oliver. Because I actually think that we would benefit more by having that comparison with urban in many cases. So I would be very cautious about that. That's my only point. And I take it you're just doing the research, Mark. You didn't design the.
I'm not making a call on that. I
No,
think
no.
there are different schools of thought on it. I would recognise, and I suppose it really comes down to what are the merits and what are you trying to achieve.
Yeah.
I suppose if you've a giant pot of money you're trying to allocate across Northern Ireland, you
Yeah.
can see the attraction. But equally, if you want to do a very tailored piece of work for one particular area, there could be value in looking at that area in its isolation, really, effectively, and seeing what is it that's contributing to particular issues or challenges within it.
The point then is how much weight does that carry?
Correct.
And I suppose there needs to be, an assessment from, well, as people do as government, they need to make an assessment as to whether that will carry enough weight then to base your argument on. I do accept the fact, I do think if there was a rural proofing, proper rural proofing,
Yes.
then that would actually improve the lot for rural people. I've always said that.
I mean, just very quickly to elaborate on that, I mean, government departments can seek to utilise this or not, the multiple deprivation measure.
Yeah.
And they can use it in different ways. They can use the multiple deprivation score, or they could, for example, look at the individual domain areas. So there would be nothing to preclude a department saying, we want the access to services domain area, and we'll take the ranks in those, and we'll allocate resources on that basis. I suppose the
Yeah.
question is what the departments do with the information that they have.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, Tom?
Right, Chair, thanks.
Okay. Mark, thank you very much again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Move on to agenda item 6. We have an oral briefing from Mr. Haas, Anti-Poverty and Social Inclusion. Can I refer members to the briefing from Mr. Haas at pages 50 to 85. And I also refer members to further information which has been tabled. Can I welcome Mr. Haas? Can I give you up to about 10 minutes to do your presentation?
15.
Okay.
And that may not be enough.
Oh, you've come a long way. No.
I'm coming a long way, and I'm coming over 20 years. Thanks, first of all, for inviting me. I feel very honoured to be able to present to you. I actually worked in Northern Ireland from 88 to 91 in the Northern Ireland Economic Research Centre, so I'm very familiar with the Northern Ireland situation. I built the first regional databases for Northern Ireland. And subsequently, I went south and worked for the Combat Poverty Agency, where I was asked to develop a deprivation index. Now, at that time, 88, most of you were around, there was something immediately clear, and that was in England, you had an agricultural labour force of 4%. In Northern Ireland, it was 8%, and in the Republic, it was 16%. So there was one thing for me was immediately clear when building a deprivation index. You cannot simply transfer what had been done in Britain over to Ireland because it would lack any legitimacy. Because what I believe is exactly the question of how do we actually measure rural deprivation. And I've been working on this for 20 years now. And to start off, following your discussion, it was very difficult to sit there and not to say something. But the question came up, do we need a separate index for rural areas? I would strongly argue against it. Because all you do is you move the question of, when we come ultimately to resource allocation, outside the realm of discussion, because it becomes simply then how much you have to make some prior arrangement of saying, let's say you give 20% to rural, 80 to urban or whatever, and then you have a rural deprivation index. But somewhere, where do you divide that 20-80 or 30-70 in the first place? So in other words, somewhere we need not two indices. What we have to think about is how do we actually measure deprivation? And are we accounting for, are we aware when we measure deprivation that there are different forms of deprivation? And this is where I think really the key is. I want to draw attention to a study which was by David Coombs. You remember the Robson Index, and the Robson Index came out as a study. The booklet was 2 parts. There was first a literature review by David Coombs on all the previous deprivation indices, and then there was the Robson Index was the second half. Now the nice thing is, in that literature review, David Coombs had a very nice definition, and the depth of that you will see in 1 minute. It says, I start with the way it's normally defined in Europe, Republic or North or whatever. Relative poverty, people are living in poverty if their income and resources, material, cultural, social, are so inadequate as to preclude them from having a standard of living the rest of society takes for granted. Sounds good, but if you try to operationalize material, cultural and social, you're in deep waters. How do you measure that? Yeah? Now, Coombs comes up with the following. The fundamental implication of the term deprivation is of an absence of essential or desirable attributes, possessions and opportunities which are considered no more than the minimum by that society. Sounds almost the same, but think about it for 1 moment, the depth of what we actually said here. Think of attributes. Attributes is the color of your skin, your ethnicity, your health, your wealth. They're all attributes. If you think in mathematical terms, it's a null vector. It rests with you. Now, interestingly, you can measure it in either census data or administrative data. Yeah, you can look at the wealth, you can look at the health, you can look at the ethnicity, and so on and so forth. So they are all variables which can be measured in the person and therefore are accessible through survey data, census data, administrative data. Now think about possessions. Possessions is what you can draw on you. So it's a vector from there to here. And interestingly, again, you can measure it in the person. You can measure the income, or if you don't have the income, you can take the education because it will infer an income stream. Doesn't matter. You have variables which you can measure, again, in the person. Therefore, it is accessible through measurement, through survey data, census data, administrative data. Fine. Now think about opportunities. Opportunities is obviously a vector from here to there. And how do we measure opportunities? And suddenly you realize you cannot measure it in the person. Take an example. Take a rural household, 4 adults. The household is not poor. 2 cars. So the first 2 people jump into a car, they can drive 30 miles quicker than I get through Dublin. No problem. The third person, luckily, there is a bus. He or she jumps on the bus, still gets somewhere to an urban area. That means it's the distance, it's the size of the town. The higher the town in the hierarchy, the more there will be job opportunities, career opportunities, essential services, and so on and so forth. The fourth person has a disability. Unfortunately, the bus has no ramp. He or she cannot get on the bus. Now suddenly this person experiences opportunity deprivation. He or she cannot access a job, essential services, and so on. So you suddenly realize that opportunity deprivation is an interaction term out of the attributes and possessions with the locational data, which is effectively a gravity model. And opportunity deprivation is the very thing you mentioned earlier, transport. If you go into rural areas and you ask people, what is it that makes it so difficult here? It is always the interaction of their situation with the access to where things are happening. 95% of what deprivation that characterizes rural deprivation is mediated through the difficulty of access to centers of decision, to key services, to career opportunities. That is what characterizes rural deprivation. And it cannot be measured in the individual. I was paid 60,000 euro to go out and find measurements for rural deprivation, and I had to come back to the client and say, sorry, I couldn't find anything, because it's technically not possible. Once you think about it in a conceptual way, then you realize it's conceptually not possible to measure rural deprivation in the individual. And therefore, every index that bases itself on the counting of poor people will have an urban bias. You just have to be clear about it. And therefore, I'm no longer surprised that the UK index, be it the Robson, the Noble, and so on, that they have an urban bias because they try to equate the measurement of deprivation with the counting of poor, with the counting of what you count through administrative records. And you cannot measure opportunity deprivation in that way. And therefore, it's the fault to conceptualize rural deprivation in our concept in a multifaceted way of having a deprivation measure which has both the conceptual basis for urban and rural deprivation and therefore measures it in a single comprehensive measurement. That is where the fault is. It's not with two different indices. It's a conceptual basis of the index itself which needs to be constructed. Yeah? Take simple thing, unemployment rate. Leitrim and Roscommon will always have a low unemployment rate. Because what happens in a rural area if you have long-term adverse labor market conditions? People emigrate, they migrate. So what do you have? You have a low unemployment rate. So the unemployment rate is not a measurement to capture rural deprivation. It will understate it. But what does emigration, sustained emigration, do? It will lead, first of all, emigration will lead to imbalance in the population. It's the core working age cohorts which are emigrating. So what do you find? Left behind is older people and young people. So you have a higher age dependency ratio. Secondly, who is emigrating? It's not just the poorest, quite the opposite. It's the ones who achieve actually quite well at school and who develop aspirations beyond what they can fulfill locally. So what do you get? It's the better educated who are moving away, and you're left behind in rural areas with a labor force which is less qualified. That makes the areas less attractive for investment, and you have the whole spiral, and so on and so forth. So in other words, we are going away in our measurement of deprivation from measuring it just by counting the poor, but looking at the structural element of what characterizes rural deprivation. And this is why we came up with a threefold classification. We have three latent concepts. At the core is social class, which is both urban and rural, can be measured through occupation, education, housing quality, and so on. Then we have labor market deprivation, which is predominantly an urban phenomenon, because that's where the unemployed go, in the expectation of a better labor market. And then to capture rural deprivation in the absence of an actual model, because we didn't get the money to build a gravity model, we use variables which try to encapsulate the demographic decline of rural areas through the outmigration, the sustained outmigration, and so on. So basically we look at population loss, we look at the age dependency ratio, and the proportion of the adult population with low education. So this is a conceptual model. And then the question is, how many variables do you need? And it's very simple. Statistical theory tells you that if you have these latent concepts and you go into a modeling environment, you need at a minimum 3 variables to measure them. Take 4 or 5. If you take more variables, it will not improve the model. So do we need 30, 40 indicators? No, statistical theory tells us 100% for sure. Look at your dimensionality and then take 3 to 4 variables and you're fine. So we're using 10 census variables. Be very clear, when you look at the Noble Index, those 7 domains are not dimensions. If you have a concept of social class, we know it will affect your housing, your health, your wealth, and so on. Those are domains. They are not dimensions. These are dimensions which are the underlying driving factors, and they can be picked up then through the variables. That's why we use confirmatory factor analysis, and with that we can fit a model, we can measure the model fit, whether the data supports the model, which it does perfectly. Not only that, we can keep the model constant over successive time periods, so therefore we get an actual measurement, not just a ranking, an actual measurement of deprivation over successive census periods, which means we can use it for monitoring and evaluation. That's the basis, the conceptual step which we did, and we do believe that we can work fantastically with that. Just to give very quick, I'm not wanting to overdo my time here. This is the population change and so on. That's the age dependency ratio, nothing big north-south there. Lone parents, mainly an urban phenomenon, up to 60-70%, but again, no big difference north-south. low qualification. You see a slight kind of clustering here on the border area, but both north and south. First interesting variable, high qualification. See the way in the south, high qualification are the urban commuter belts, yeah? Why is it the belts around the cities? That's where you have rezoning of areas, young couples moving in, dual incomes, young with relatively high professional status and so on, qualifications. But interestingly, in the north, you have a much more diversified spread of high qualification, which is very interesting. Obviously, you have the east and west of the band, but on top of it, you have the access along your motorway, which stands there for 50 years. Meaning, in the south, with high qualifications, effectively, what happens is people from rural areas, where we know that the educational outcomes at school are as good as anywhere else, they move to the cities for university and they don't return. In Northern Ireland, people with high qualifications can access the key labour markets, jobs from anywhere within the north. That is interesting. Very important difference. Then the mirror picture for low social class, high social class, again, the same as with high qualifications. And then we have massive difference in the unemployment rate in 2011, literally twice the rate in the south as compared to the north, so you have a complete level difference there. And female unemployment the same. These are the 10 variables, and persons per room, again, no big story. They're just the bad policies in Dublin with building. Putting those 10 variables together through those 3 latent concepts, this is the map that we're getting. Now something extraordinarily interesting is happening. First of all, for some, as some surprise, the north is more affluent than the south in 2011. That has clearly driven the average is 0.3, saying our index has a normal distribution, bell curve. I come to that later on. And we are mapping out here the normal distribution. And so the light green and light yellow is the middle field, the blue is the affluent, the yellow and red then the deprived areas. And what you see immediately is that the north is more affluent, which is driven by the differential in the unemployment rate in 2011. But more interesting is the urban-rural patterns here. And what you see is an extreme urban-rural gradient in the south, which doesn't exist in the same way in the north. Now that was quite new for me and somewhat unexpected to find such a strong difference in the pattern, that simply the holes which are in between the urban centers here, the holes don't exist in the same way in the north. Now that is something very interesting. Now that is not the Noble Index, but our index. And strangely enough, when I look at the average of the rural areas, and I look at the Noble and our index, it comes out as actually the same. So despite conceptually very clearly holding that our index is superior in terms of capturing rural deprivation, it doesn't come out with a higher value in terms of rural deprivation for the north. And that is quite unexpected, maybe. So it's a lot of food for thought, let's say it this way. Let me just follow on. So the question may therefore not be necessarily the index. And clearly there is something about rural areas not getting any funding. So let me draw a little bit, finish off with 2-3 minutes on that. First of all, here we have the different distribution, north and south. And you see the way the mean is higher in the north. Overall, a normal distribution, though not within the south itself. This normal distribution becomes very important. Look at this. This is the Northern Ireland, the small areas, 4,537 small areas, and I have color-coded them red and green here, green for rural. The bunching here comes because the Northern Ireland index, the multiple deprivation index, tries just to measure the poor like a one-tailed distribution on a bell curve, yeah? And it doesn't try to measure affluence, whilst our index is a continuous index from affluence to deprivation. Therefore, you get this bunching here on the left. But interestingly, when I look at the bottom decile, then on our index, this would be this line. So basically, you see relatively few green areas below that line. And on the MDM, it would be to the right of the vertical, and you see almost no green there. So that is where your 10 percentile is in terms of the rural areas at the small, little bit of a difference, but either way you see that most rural areas are clearly in that quadrant. If I look at it in terms of distributions, again, you see here that on our index, I would measure at the level of small areas, I would measure 6.8% in terms of rural areas, whilst 93, which are in the bottom decile, whilst 93.2% would be urban areas. If I go to the multiple deprivation measures, here's what I said about the non-normal distribution, yeah? That you don't have an affluence spectrum in the MDM, yeah? It's just the deprivation spectrum. And the MDM measures only 2.6% of small areas in the most deprived decile. So there is a little bit of a 2.5-fold difference, but it's still very, very minor in terms of rural areas coming in there. Couple of statistics here. This is the 2.6 and 6.8, which I just referred to. This is when we measure SA. When I then aggregate it, and this is the first important point, when you aggregate data, when you aggregate our index, because it's normally distributed, if there's an affluent and a deprived area coming together, then the values become a middle value. But on the MDM, because it only counts the poor, affluence will not compensate for deprivation. Now there is a kind of ideological debate behind that. Should it not? I believe it should. Because in the end of the day, they are all area measures, and we have to be aware that we will never be effectively counting the poor, but it will always be a likelihood measure. I can go another day into that debate. But interesting, when we move up to ward level, then our index would actually capture roughly 10% in the bottom decile as rural, whilst the SA level measures from the MDM aggregated upwards would be half that. And if I take the actual ward level MDM measure, it's only 1/3 of that. So you do see that the conceptual basis translates into different proportions, although not radical. And that brings me, this is actually just mapping out, the dark green areas would be the bottom decile, that would be on our index, that would be on the MDM SA level, and that would be on the MDM ward level. So it's no here nor there. There's no big story in that. And that is after working a lot on that, yeah? So I do think that we have to ask the question differently, and that is, whichever index we have, how do we actually work with it in terms of resource allocation? And that's what I want to spend the last 2 minutes on, if you allow me. And that is the following. We were asked, or I was asked, to develop a resource allocation model with the deprivation measures. And we started off for a rollout of 40 million for primary healthcare centres. You may remember the debate with Roisin Shortall resigning over that, because the politicians decided on a different list after they first signed off. But then the HSE became, the health services became very angry about that and said, we want to build a resource allocation not for 40 million, but for the health budget of 10 billion. And that is what we are working on at the moment, of how do you use the deprivation index. And this is very important for rural areas, because it's not the fire engine running out the ambulance service, yeah, for a social inclusion budget of 40 million here or 100 million there, but how do you affect 10 billion to account for deprivation? What we have come up is the following. This is the normal curve from our deprivation index. Yeah? 1 standard deviation, 2, we multiply it by 10, so it's a score of 10, minus 10, minus 20, minus 30. Now think of a small area which has a score of minus 30, which is, in other words, very, very deprived. So when I think these are 100 households, they will again be, this is the kind of little methodological step, they will again be normally distributed within their area. In other words, if I'm at minus 30, then 98 out of the 100 will actually be poor. If I take a cutoff point, let's say, of the middle here, yeah? To start off with, maybe I should start 1 point further. Maybe we take a total population model, where we have no deprivation. So the deprivation model would simply count everything for each SA to the left of this line. That's the whole population. But then, when I take a slightly deprived model for half the population, as I say, if the area is minus 30, it would be 98% of the population. If it's minus 20, then it would be this much, and so on. And as you can see, the more you move up in the affluence, the smaller the part of the population that will fall under the area of the curve to the left of your cutoff line. And then you can have different models. You can take a low deprivation, a medium deprivation, or a high deprivation model, and you can shift this cutoff line. But the point is, you're not ruling any area in and out. What you do is you measure the proportion of each area according to its deprivation score of that falls to the left of this line, and thereby it becomes a gradual measurement which doesn't have any cutoff points, but which completely accounts for the relative deprivation of each area as measured by a comprehensive index. And that gets you away completely from all the cutoff points, and you can then skew any budget, be it for bridge building, motorway building, education, health. You can basically start spending the money in the main spending departments, accounting for deprivation and using a deprivation measures which accounts for both urban and rural deprivation. Then we are getting a step forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. You have developed a model which looks at deprivation on an all-island basis, and you suggest that Northern Ireland is more affluent than the Republic of Ireland, and that's something beyond surmise. But can you provide some reasons why this may be, that the difference also extends into rural areas, and you mentioned opportunity deprivation as a major area of difference. Can you explain this, please?
Yeah, the differential north-south, the 3 points on the deprivation scale, is clearly the effect of the overall employment, yeah? You have a very strong public sector employment, which during the crisis has provided an effective floor, whilst in the south it just fell out. And so I would think that even that differential may not exist right now, even 2 years later. The unemployment has reduced in the south quite dramatically over the last 2-3 years. Probably that level effect is gone out by now. But in terms of rural areas, I definitely do not see the same gradient, the extremes of people simply leaving rural areas, everyone. I mean, if you go into a rural area in the south and you have a class in a school which performed well, you can be sure that 60% of that class will be 3-4 years later no longer in the area. They will have left. They will have gone either to the cities or they will have gone to Australia, Canada, or elsewhere, yeah, or the UK. And that effect doesn't seem to be there in the same way in the north. And I think behind it is the overall size of the north, which simply is smaller, therefore you stay within a certain reach. I do think that the building in the 1960s of the motorway, you can clearly see the axis along the motorway, which has allowed people to live in a rural space while accessing the key urban opportunities. I'm talking here exactly overcoming opportunity deprivation, better transport network, road works and so on. We have now good roads in the south, but that is 50 years later. So I don't know what the long-term effect will be. And I think also that probably the Troubles have played a role in it in a peculiar way. And that is that those who are better off and well-educated and in high-earning jobs do not necessarily want to live in Belfast or Derry, and therefore have maintained a more rural lifestyle, whilst in the south you wouldn't see them there. And so I do think that in a weird way, that may have contributed. I've no direct, it's just looking at it, yeah? I would think that these are the factors which have, over a 30, 40, 50-year period, resulted in a slightly different settlement pattern in the north to the south, which is statistically coming out extremely clear.
Okay. Declan McAleer.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose you're very welcome, Rich, to the committee, obviously. what in your opinion, would be the main sort of drawbacks with the current methodology we adopt here in the north?
I think that probably the strongest shortfall is how it is being applied. Yeah, I think this whole thing of setting a cut-off point, which leads to situations left and right of a road and all that. Yeah, what's the difference? This whole thing about ranking. Yeah, I could go bananas about it. Yeah, if you divide this into ranks, yeah, any normal curve, then between here and here, rank. Let's say we go by deciles. Yeah, 10 deciles. So you have 5 and 6 left and right of the mean. There's no difference between those. It's a rank difference, but there's no difference. But between here and here, which is all in the 10th decile, I give you an example. St. John's Ward in Limerick. Yeah? Now, in Ireland as a whole, over a 15-year period, we saw education, third-level education, going up from 13 to 32%. That's a 2.5-fold increase. Incredible, historically. In St. John's Ward in Limerick, it went up 5-fold, from 0.2 to 1%. Yeah? It's the most deprived ward in Ireland. Yeah? That is -6 standard deviation. Yeah? 1% third level education, which means everyone in that area who achieves better leaves the area, leaving behind just no role models, nothing. Yeah? That is -6 standard deviations. In a ranking, that would be together with here, where probably a ranking is just a bad thing. But the problem is that all these other indices, the Noble Index, the Robson Index, and all those indices used before, they cannot do any better than ranking. They have no methodology of actually measuring deprivation in a comparable way over successive periods because they don't use the methodologies. So you have to get away from the ranking. Yeah, and I think a resource allocation model which works on those pseudo shares. Remember, these are not estimates of the number of poor people because it's building on a deprivation index which includes opportunity deprivation. So in a rural area, the people may no longer be there because they have left, but you still measure the deprivation. So it's a quasi-measure of quasi-counting the poor as a measurement of relative deprivation, but it's a structural measure. And then you put a value on that for each area, and then you aggregate over your functional areas and you get a value. You can use it for primary care areas, you can use it for library board areas, whatever, yeah? And you can use it for anything. But the point is you establish the deprivation index at the lowest level of small areas, and then you have a sliding scale which takes into account the real value of difference from the mean, does an estimate about it, on the assumption of a normal distribution within, which is a reasonable assumption, and then aggregates it, and you have a value of resource allocation. It's not rocket science.
Mr. Warren?
Thanks, Chairman. It's an excellent academic presentation. In relation to what lessons we're going to learn from it for public policy, what's your advice about resource allocation?
Sorry, the last thing.
What's your advice in relation to resource allocation for the
Yes, resource allocation on a model like this, yeah? Get away from the ranking, get away from the cutoff points, and get away from it just being used for special budgets, but introduce it as a funding mechanism to main budgets. Yeah?
So in other words, are you trying to attack the area?
I don't attack. Sorry.
To target the relative impoverished areas with more public resource allocation?
Yes. Take cancer or life expectancy. If you take quintiles, bottom 20%, top, life expectancy difference 7 years. That's the difference in life expectancy. Yeah? If you go by deciles, it would be probably 10 or 15 years difference in life expectancy, whether you live here or there. So that is something you do not address just by one budget, be it the peace budget, be it whatever, yeah, or a special budget for rural areas, yeah, rural development budget, yeah, or LEADER, or whatever. Those budgets will not affect why people who live in a poor area have poorer health outcomes, why they have a lesser life expectancy. Yeah? What we need is that we have to look at the main social gradients as they exist in health, education, and so on and so forth, and start working on a conceptual basis of a clear profile of the effects of social gradients, and then, according to the relative gradient, measure the gradient, do studies. We're starting to do studies, how different cancers, what is the exact social gradient in terms of cancer outcomes, heart disease, diabetes, obesity, and so on and so forth, and then introduce that as a weighting mechanism for mainstream budgets. That's where we need to go.
Okay. Come on.
Chair, thank you. Thanks for the presentation. Very complex, I have to say, but I'm trying to get clarification just around what you said. You know, that you can't use single measures for all of the aspects, but because we have the multiple deprivation measures here, obviously a number of those aspects feed into the one measure. And I'm wondering, do you see that as a good measurement project or not?
The problem is that the Noble Index, it does a factor analysis. In other words, it abstracts from the individual indicators at the level of the 7 domains, and then it simply counts that together. When you ask yourself what's the weighting behind it, it's a very simple answer. There were so many civil servants sitting around the table, representing their departments, and it's the weight of the department that made up the weighting. And just look at it, yeah? And therefore services came in 5%, or was increased to 10. But services itself is not a measure of rural deprivation. As I said before, services, distance to services, is rurality, but not necessarily rural deprivation.
Sorry, just okay, you've answered that. How do you put your proposals into a multiple deprivation measure?
It is a multiple deprivation. It conceptualizes deprivation immediately as a multifaceted by social class, acute labor market deprivation, and demographic decline as the rural equivalent, yeah? So therefore it has the underlying dimensionality. This is the whole thing, that the multiple deprivation measures, they count multiple domains, but they never test the underlying factors that influence all these 7 different domains. That analysis is never...
But are you counting the underlying factors, but not those other broad-based issues like access to services?
It's reflected because we have designed...
You're just not giving as much weight to those measures.
No, it's not. It's not just because we are conceptualizing in our sorry. Because the way it's done, first of all, there are 2 different things. There's an exploratory factor analysis and confirmatory. Exploratory works that you take data, and you reduce the data through your underlying factors, which means you take out the double counting. Yeah, that's normally done with an exploratory factor analysis. Here we do the opposite. We conceptualize first a dimensionality which is shown to be comprehensive because we have a null vector, a vector towards, and a vector away, yeah, which is a comprehensive plane. Therefore, you know that you have 3 profound dimensions. I did an analysis of about 20 different deprivation indices worldwide, and we always came out with the same dimensionality. And therefore, we then look simply at variables by which we can describe these. It doesn't matter exactly what variables you put in, because if I put in other variables which are similar, I would come out with exactly the same result. It doesn't matter that I don't have a health measure in it, because it will be correlated again to these measures. So therefore, by having more measures doesn't make it a better index. What's clear is you have to have a dimensionality which itself has a theoretical base to be comprehensive. And that's the problem that the multiple deprivation measures, they use 52 indicators, but in the end of the day, they never even look at the underlying dimensionality, because all it is different observations where you do not know how much they overlap. There's a profound problem there. It looks like an awful lot, but there's actually nothing proven.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but we've only, I suppose, your research to give us the confidence that your 3 measures that you've come out with at the end actually reflect all the other measures. Now, you're saying Doesn't matter what you put in there.
I did this for the OECD study, yeah, comparing 20
Yeah.
different.
But you're saying it doesn't matter what you put in at the front end, you get the same tree coming out at the back end. Again, I don't know whether that's...
This is done, the technique is called structural equation modeling. In structural equation modeling, you hypothesize a structural relationship, and then you test whether your data empirically supports that structure. And you get a measurement, a fit index. And a fit index is here 0.95, which is extremely high, and shows that it is an extremely well-fitted model. In other words, in our methodology, we can actually prove that it is a well-fitting model, which can never be in an exploratory factor analysis or in the Noble Index. They can never prove whether their index is a good one or bad one, because there's no statistical measure. This methodology has built into it an actual measurement of the quality of the fit, which is, it's very technical and it's statistical, but it is an absolute copper-fast proof that actually the data...
I'll have to take your word for it, Chair, because I don't have the energy.
I should say we presented the first prototype of this at an international conference of 700 methodology scientists. It's the largest conference worldwide every 4 years on science methodology, just on the methodological aspects. And there was a section on indicator and construction. And the Australian Bureau of Census and the Canadian census offices, which are the two most advanced census statistics offices in the world, congratulated us to having broken the conundrum with deprivation indices. They said, you have done what we wanted to do for 30 years. Take that as a little bit of confidence.
If they give you authorization, how much point me arguing?
But Robert Beattie said to us, when he saw it first, he said, I wish I could run with your stuff, yeah? He said, unfortunately, we seem to be locked into having to go with the UK all the time on these things, but they acknowledged that this was a superior method.
Okay.
They don't say that.
Quick question, Declan.
Chair, thanks, Lynn, back again. Just see, I know this is probably hypothetical, but see in a scenario where your index was considered as a means by government in terms of allocating resources and target need, what do you think would be the impact for rural areas in the north?
Give you an example.
Methodology.
Let's talk cancer for a moment, yeah? And I'm talking Republic, but you will see the appropriateness immediately of what I'm talking about. There's a debate about cancer being channeled through 8 cancer centres, yeah? Dublin, Cork, and so on, main cities. There's now a discussion about a single paediatric hospital in Dublin. If you want to have better outcomes in cancer care, you need specializations. You can't have every single local hospital operating on colorectal cancer, yeah? Because they don't have the expertise. The 2 biggest hospitals in the south, Beaumont and St. Vincent's, achieve 100 colorectal cancer cases per annum. Internationally, a speciality would be 200 cases per annum of the same cancer. So you need specialization. So how do you get specialization when you do not account at the same time for accessibility? So if we want to improve services, and we are under the same constraints, be it here in the north and the south, England or elsewhere, the public purse is tight. We have to improve services, and with people expecting the same services everywhere, we have to combine the ability to concentrate services whilst making them simultaneously accessible to everyone in the country. That is the task. And the only way is that, and the only legitimacy you have, is if you achieve that by making these concepts, be it job opportunities or health, it's the same. You can exchange them for one another, yeah? Where if you have, on the one hand, a more advanced specialization in a society, which everyone wants to be able to access, then you have to allow for the accessibility of that. And that's why we have to start thinking about opportunity deprivation, because the more we concentrate things, the more we will create opportunity deprivation. Why do we have local communities standing up against the closure of their A&Es? Because they do not trust that they will have the access to where the better A&E then is. So if we do not combine that in a program, that we say that we will make that accessible to everyone, so we have to conceptualize and measure that degree of deprivation that we create through specialization and counter for it through accessibility. And that is an overarching thing that doesn't go, it may not be within the same department, it may not be within health that is being accounted for, but the government as a whole has to account for it. And that is the problem we are facing.
Okay, Declan? And anyone else? Okay. Can I thank you again very much for coming, Mr. Haas. You've come a long distance, so thank you very much again. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
You dog, sure. Didn't keep me.
Oh no, they didn't keep me. No, not that. I know the answer. I done.
I sure did. I tell you.
Very good.
Can I ask? Okay, can I ask members to note that we'll now move to the agenda item dealing with Dairy UK. We'll take the agenda item on Dart's business plan after that. Agenda item 7, we have an oral briefing from Dairy UK and appreciation of the dairy markets. I refer members to the briefing paper from Dairy UK, which has been tabled. And can I welcome Trevor Lockhart, Vice Chairperson, and Dr. Mike Johnson, Northern Ireland Director. You're very welcome. And can I ask you to take up to 10 minutes to give your presentation, and then we'll have some questions. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thanks also to the committee for the opportunity to come along this afternoon to brief the committee on the current challenges within the dairy markets and the impact that that has and potentially will have on our local milk producers, and perhaps to also to outline some measures we believe could usefully be taken to try and mitigate and alleviate some of the undoubted pressures which are building within the dairy supply chain. To paint the picture, it's probably best to talk about the markets in the context of supply and demand. I guess price is always determined by supply and demand in a marketplace. And we have seen significant changes in that supply and demand balance over the last 6 or 8 months. Previously, we had seen on the supply side favourable weather conditions across all the main milk producing regions worldwide. We have seen falling feed costs. We have also seen strong milk producer prices, the combination of which has served to bolster milk supply right across the north of America, Northern Europe and the Southern Hemisphere. We have also seen in Northern Ireland in particular a very significant increase in our own local output, with production running approximately 11% ahead year on year. The combination of these strong prices and lower input costs have stimulated that extra output. Yet on the demand side of the equation, we have seen a slowing down in the economic activity internationally. We were seeking the China markets, the Asian markets and other developing economies as being significant outlets for the increased production that was expected internationally. The slowing down of economic growth rates in those economies has had a slowing down and a dampening effect on the demand side. We have seen the situation also exaggerated by the import ban from Russia, and that 30% of the cheese output of the European community was destined for Russia. With the presence of the export ban, The production has been in part diverted across to skim milk powder and butter, and in part resides back in cheese. So that extra cheese also has to be sold. And the additional skim milk powder production which has resulted from that situation has already added to what was already an emerging oversupply situation with powder production worldwide. So ultimately, the downward pressures on the supply side on milk price have far outweighed the demand side opportunities, as a result of which we have seen over the course from January 2014 to now a very significant fall off in global dairy product prices, and consequently local milk prices now reflecting those falls. On the paper that we had provided the committee, there are some useful statistics which, if we were to look at them in the context of world dairy situation and then gradually bring it back down to our local supply base, we can see from a world dairy market situation that from January 14 to November 14, we have seen a reduction of 50% and greater in skim milk powder and whole milk powder. And we have seen lesser reductions of around 38% in butter and cheddar. From a European perspective, we have seen prices fall by up to 40%. And again, there's a table within the document which shows the breakdown, again with skim milk powder and whole milk powder falling upwards on 40%, butter by about 27%, and cheddar by about 18%. The understanding of how this impacts on Northern Ireland, it's useful also to remind ourselves of the product utilisation from a Northern Ireland perspective, in that 85% of the dairy products that we manufacture in Northern Ireland are destined for export, with some of those for export in the European Union, and a lot of them also for export in international markets. So in simple terms, when you translate a almost 50% reduction in world market pricing collapse and a upwards on 40% reduction in European market returns, then that gives a signal of the scale of the reduction in local milk prices in Northern Ireland. So far, we have seen local milk producer prices fall by approximately 10 pence per litre over the last 12 months. For an average Northern Ireland dairy farmer, that translates into approximately £60,000 a year. And that only represents about a 27 to 28% reduction in the returns that he was receiving. So local producer prices have not yet fallen to fully reflect the reductions that there has been in international world and European product prices. In the absence, therefore, of some correction to the supply-demand equation, further milk price reductions to local milk producers are inevitable. And the winter prospects for producers is quite worrying indeed. In the context of what we believe is necessary, when we reflect back to the last two crises that there has been in Northern Ireland dairy industry, in 2009 the situation was aided by the intervention mechanisms operated through the European Union, which helped to remove product from the marketplace. In 2012, we had the weather events in the Southern Hemisphere, which served to reduce supply and help correct the supply-demand balance. In 2014, heading into 2015, all of the supply drivers that we have articulated earlier are still prevalent. And on the demand side of the equation, there is no visible sign yet of a significant return to the marketplace, in particular of the Chinese buyers, with the amount of product that has been bought by China very significantly down year on year. So the intervention mechanisms that helped the situation in 2009 and the weather event in 2012, there is no sign as yet of either mechanism triggering or intervening to help us just at this point. We cannot control the weather, and therefore we have to focus on the things that we can control. And we believe that the availability and use of intervention again is required in a Northern Ireland context, and we believe on a broader European context. The difficulty with the intervention mechanism is that the pricing levels at which the intervention mechanism operates were established in 2003, which, when translated back into local milk producer prices, represents about 16 pence per litre. And when we assume that the local average cost of production is now at least 25 pence per litre, and in many cases above that, intervention is a difficult solution as well. So nonetheless, we require it to be available and in place. And secondly, we also need to have the basis upon which the prices are established reviewed to allow them to reflect a more realistic level and a much closer reflection of the real costs of milk production. Intervention was never designed to be a market in itself, and nor is that what we are seeking, but it does need to be established at a level which is much more reflective of the current costs of production. Companies in Northern Ireland, as we speak, are preparing to have intervention available, and the level to which the mechanism may or wish to be required is as yet unknown, but it is important that the mechanism is available. And there are, as I say, at least 2 companies in Northern Ireland who are in the process of trying to make sure that the intervention processes are up and operational. It has been quite some years now, since 2009, since we were last here, and the knowledge of how these mechanisms operate, we need to make sure that all our relevant authorities through the Department of Agriculture and the Rural Payments Agency have the processes up and running, so that if we do need to utilise them at a much greater level, that the tap can be turned on pretty quickly. The other mechanism which we believe will be useful and helpful will be export refunds. Ultimately, we would prefer to sell product in the marketplace than to have it intervened. In order to allow our products to be competitive on the international stage, export refunds would be of great assistance in doing so. And again, that is something that is within the gift of the European Union to bring into play. Undoubtedly, the cash flow pressures which are going to emanate from this on our local milk producers are going to be significant and considerable. The pressures on our local milk processors will be equally very challenging. And as we head into the most expensive period of the year for milk production, ensuring that we can do everything that we can to assist and support cash flows on our local dairy farms will be of great importance. And therefore we will be looking to seek and support of the local banks in terms of helping their farmers through this situation. The prompt payment of single farm payments to farmers to support cash flows will be important, and making sure that our own authorities are in place to invoke the intervention mechanisms when required is equally extremely important. Chairman, that's a brief flavour and overview of the very severe and significant challenges we believe exist in the dairy sector at present, and just brief mention of some of the steps we believe could be usefully taken.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, Mike, want to?
No, that's
okay. Well, I suppose I personally declare an interest as family. My family has a dairy herd at home myself, so certainly you painted quite a bleak picture at the moment. Is there any opportunities for any new markets out there at the moment, or is it?
The behaviour of buyers in these circumstances is always for them to buy little and buy often, as opposed to buy in some more significant quantities. The expectation and belief on buyers for some months now has been that markets will fall further, and they have been therefore happy just to buy for their immediate requirements, as opposed to commit to build any significant stock levels. The opportunities from a Northern Ireland perspective, we have a very significant global reach in terms of our outlets for dairy products presently. The customer relationships are well established, but the behaviour of buyers is probably one of the more significant elements. Having said that, there is always more we can do, and in terms of trying to establish closer relationships with customers, and also the opportunity to develop new products, more added value products, particularly for bases for infant formula, etc., are opportunities for the Northern Ireland dairy sector going further. And through the good auspices of the Northern Ireland Dairy Council, there has been reasonably a successful initiative to avail of some funding to enhance and support the activities of local buyers in that regard. And Mike may wish to make a brief reference to that, Chairman, with your permission.
Yeah, you may have seen that we recently were awarded a 3-year contract with EU funding. The value of the 3-year contract is about €625,000. 50% of that will be paid by the European Union. The focus of this 3-year programme will be to identify and start doing business with new customers. The geographical areas of focus will be China, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and depending on what happens with the Russian import ban, we may have an opportunity of doing some work there. The programme will involve participation in a couple of international trade fairs. The first of these will be at SIAL, China, in Shanghai, at the beginning of May. And we'll have a number of dairy companies, Northern Ireland dairy companies, participating in that. And then each year for the 3 years, we will be bringing in the representatives from 8 buyers. These are buyers, buying companies that the dairy companies will identify and that we will then bring into Northern Ireland for 3-day visits. And the opportunity there will be there to showcase the advantages, the benefits of the Northern Ireland dairy supply chain as a whole, and to use that as a leverage then to develop business with these. So we feel that there's a tremendous opportunity here, and the fact that we're able to pull down the EU funding obviously means that we're able to do more with the available resource.
Okay. You say intervention has not yet kicked in. There has been calls for this at this stage. You have no clear indication as to when or if it will kick in.
Chairman, I think part of the previous difficulty was that there is a limited window during a calendar year when intervention traditionally is available and open. There has been, through a couple of successive steps now, endeavours to ensure that it does remain open through the periods of the year that it wouldn't traditionally be. And ensuring that it was open right through to December was step one in that exercise. And a secondary step to make sure that it stays open from the 1st of January through to the end of March is something which also is important. And there is due process, hopefully, which will result in that being secured. That's only part of the process, Chairman. However, I think it's the mechanism is that companies will submit a product for consideration for intervention, and then the decision as to whether to accept product into the intervention process will be decided by the Dairy Market Management Committee in the EU. The expectation of the Commission themselves and the expectation of a lot of the significant milk producers in Europe is that in the early part of 2015, in the absence of any significant correction in supply or demand, that it is almost certain that we will have a significant utilisation of intervention. And that inevitably will also entail Northern Ireland in our view.
Intervention prices set, I think, at 2003 levels, which is very low. Yeah.
Yes.
Representations, I'm sure you've spoken to our MEPs in relation to that.
We have briefed our representatives, Chairman, yes, and we have, with their assistance and support, been able to avail of a number of opportunities to meet with quite a wide range of Commission officials, and Mike himself will be back in Brussels on Thursday, meeting further officials, and with the intention of making sure that they are well aware of the situation. Historically in Northern Ireland, we find that because of our absolute reliance on exports to a much greater degree than most other member states, that Northern Ireland sees the pain soonest and hardest. And sometimes when we first engage with Brussels in these events, they can be dismissive in the early days of our fears that indeed things are going to be as bad as we are painting them. Inevitably, however, the market being the market, it filters across everybody in terms of its impact, and over time you see that more voices join in the campaigns to ensure that these tools are available, and it looks as though that's going to be repeated this time round, with gradually more voices joining the chorus for help.
Okay, Joe Byrne.
Thanks, Chairman. Again, thanks for the stark presentation on the situation. It's interesting, Trevor, you talked about both the processors and the farmers not covering their costs. Just following on from the Chairman, given the 16p per litre floor at the moment, obviously that's inadequate. The question is, what would we need to get as a viable floor? And secondly, obviously there's the immediate cash flow crisis, and obviously we've had an 11% increase in milk production in 2014. Given that we have to get 85% of this product off the region, for the medium term, can we continue just to produce extra milk and hope that we can get a return in the future?
Thank you. The question of viable pricing, as we know, there is an extremely wide range of break-even milk prices across various types of dairy farms in Northern Ireland. And whilst the absolute floor, as we paint it, is the intervention mechanism, we believe that in the short term, base prices, which are currently for October milk around 24 pence per litre, will fall further between now and Christmas. And in January, February time, we will have a better perspective as to whether and how much further they might fall. Realistically, however, the average dairy farmer in Northern Ireland needs 25 pence per litre, and that will give very limited ability to reinvest. Those indeed that have invested significantly in their businesses because they believe there is a bright future in dairying and because they want it to be the career of choice for their next generation, have invested heavily in their facilities, and in many ways they are some of the best dairy farms in Northern Ireland, but also some of the most vulnerable because they're carrying the higher depreciation and interest costs that go with those investments. So that level of tolerance from the banks that we made brief reference to would therefore be very helpful in that context. So in relation to the longer term future for the Northern Ireland dairy industry, we do believe that there is a lot to be positive about from the dairy industry over the long term. Undoubtedly what we're going to see, however, is this volatility, where we go for periods where this time last year where we were paying out somewhere in the region of 35 to 36 pence per litre in milk price to this October when it was at 24 and falling. What we in the longer term need to develop is a combination of improving and added value markets, and we need to develop mechanisms and tools that will allow us to manage the risk around volatility. That's volatility in market prices for dairy products, volatility in the input costs of grains and animal feed costs, and volatility of exchange rates being the three main components that impact on returns. We do believe that there will be a growing uptake and adoption of the use of future markets for forward managing the sales of dairy products. These mechanisms, however, are very much in their infancy in the European Union, and they will take time to mature and for people to become confident in their use. But over time, we believe that one of the tools that will be available and be needed for the industry, particularly for those that are operating on a higher cost base, will be to consider forward selling a proportion, perhaps just initially, of their milk output, in which they can have certainty over the milk price, and at the same time as they commit to that sale, they commit to the purchase of their most significant cost, being their feed cost. So it is feasible that you could forward sell part of your milk output and you could lock in your major costs, thereby managing your margin. Because I guess for the dairy farmer, having a secure margin is more important than having a milk price at 35p or 30p or 25p. If you've got security of your milk margin and your return, that's what will allow you to business plan forward with more confidence. So we would see that that would be something which we have to, as an industry, gradually start to embrace over time.
Chairman, welcome the clarification on the issue by yourself, Trevor. Intervention in the past had a sort of a difficult image. We heard about milk lakes and cheese mountains. I think that led to the big change in the CAP policy at the time. If we do get to an intervention system and an export grants refund system, as I think is necessary in the short term, you reckon earlier on the two companies have made some provision. Do we have the storage capacity, the refrigeration systems in the north to retain what might have to go into intervention here?
An important question, Joanne. Indeed, just yesterday, the Rural Payments Agency were making contact with the Cold Store Association in Northern Ireland and other providers of dry storage to gauge and get a view on what volume of storage capacity is currently available in Northern Ireland, and it will be envisaged to be available in the first and second quarters of 2015. So that assessment is being undertaken as we speak. From some of those initial replies that I have seen circulating, there is a reasonably significant quantity of dry storage space available. The cold storage space perhaps a little more challenged, but at this point in time, skim milk powder is getting very close to intervention levels, where we're trading at about €1,800 a tonne, with the intervention trigger being at €1,700. For butter, butter is currently still trading quite well above intervention levels. So we would be confident that in the short term that we will still be able to sell and trade the butter. The skim milk powder would be our greater concern.
And lastly, Chairman, if I just can indulge one more, I think it's crucial that we have a vanguard of lobby in Brussels. How coherent is that vanguard at the moment? And is the Minister and the Department on side over there on behalf of the industry, or are we still waiting on them to go there?
The challenge we always face from a Northern Ireland perspective in trying to engage with Europe on these matters is that DEFRA are a significant voice around the table in Brussels. We have had meetings with the relevant people within DEFRA within this last month or two. It would be true to say, however, that we found the hearing less than sympathetic, in that we from a GB perspective have a marketplace where 55% of the product is consumed on the fresh consumer dairy products, and there's a much less reliance and dependence on exports. And we find getting our voice articulated through the proper channel in DEFRA in Brussels is problematic. And therefore, we always, as the alternative is try and make as loud a noise we can ourselves, supported. And I would say we have got universal support from our representatives to facilitate those engagements where possible. But it would be more meaningful if we could have DEFRA on side, and so far they haven't made noises that would be articulating the scale of the difficulties that we believe are looming.
Thanks, John.
Okay, Joanne Dobson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your briefing. I don't need to tell you about the worry amongst farmers, Trevor. You spoke of financial pressures being significant and considerable. I think that's putting it mildly. There's so much anxiety and stress out there with the current prices, so much so that a lovely family that I know you would know quite close to me in Brickland, the farmer took a shotgun and tried to take his own life. Quiet, unassuming family, just trying to earn a living, and that has sent ripples through the entire community, and we really do feel for him as he recovers. But the real reason why he did it hasn't gone away, and I'm so fearful with the current fluctuation in milk prices that for so many farmers are on the brink, and he will not be the last. So the essence is urgency about this. So it's just hard not to be affected when you're watching your neighbours and people that you know and at total rock bottom. You spoke about new export markets. So do you feel, is there enough being done to increase export markets outside Northern Ireland? And can you let me know your view on the impact of ending up quotas next year? Because we've heard so many times about the Republic planning to ramp up production, and if they don't secure the export markets they need. So what will this impact have on local farmers? And then I noticed you spoke about developing new products. How long will this take? Because dairy farmers need help and they need it now. So
Okay, in relation to the development of, maybe starting with the last one, the new products, I think is an ongoing process for Northern Ireland, and I think that Northern Ireland has a reasonably good track record in that regard. I think the ambition of all of our local processors is to try and add value to products, whether those be in the consumer space on the retail side, or whether it's in the food ingredient side, by adding to the quality and the functionality of the dairy ingredients we produce. A number of dairy companies in Northern Ireland were recently successful in being offered assistance by InvestNI to allow them to further invest in the facilities necessary to allow them to further enhance that product development process. And through the work that Mike has alluded to in the context of funding for reaching out further into new export markets and bringing those people back to Northern Ireland to let them see what we do.
do you have a time scale on that, Trevor?
Well, that will be the specific funding in terms of the programme. I'll ask Mike maybe just to comment on the rollout of that programme and when we see that money hitting the road. Joanne, if I may.
That programme starts on the 3rd of January. So the first evidence of activity will be the first week in May, when we'll have a stand with Northern Ireland dairy companies at the CIAL China trade event in Shanghai, and then the first batch of buyers will come into Northern Ireland probably the first week in June.
And Trevor said the prices are going to go even lower between now and Christmas.
Yes.
And a lot of faith seems to have been put in the banks to support farmers. What if they don't? Where are we if they don't?
Yeah, I think the real difficulty as we see it over the next 3 or 4 months is that at this point the dairy processors have reduced the speed of the fall in milk price. So unacceptable in all as the prices currently are for milk producers. The fact that the base milk prices for our local producers has fallen by 27%, whilst the markets has fallen by a minimum of 40%, is a reflection of the fact that the majority of the milk processing assets in Northern Ireland are owned by farmer co-ops, and those farmer co-ops view it as their responsibility to try and support milk producers where possible. However, the total profits earned by Northern Ireland dairy companies last year was about £20 million in Northern Ireland. When you divide that across all of the litres that were produced, that equates to 1 pence per litre. And in the context of the scale of the market reductions that we have now seen, it is a limited and ability from the processors to do that indefinitely. Dairy producers will hopefully receive their single farm payments in good time during December. That will come in advance of what for a lot of people will be reasonably significant tax bills, which will be triggered on the back of the better year that there was last year. And the cash flow pressures that will be prevalent on dairy farms, if not already, will be absolutely acute in February and March time.
There's no good news Christmas story to deliver to the dairy farmers in Northern Ireland, essentially what you're saying?
Yeah, it is in these times when markets are still falling, it is very difficult to give anything other than a realistic assessment of how we see it. And at the minute, all of the supply dynamics, there's no change that we can foresee there to help us. And on the demand side, the challenges that we've articulated are there. So, John, I would like to be here saying that we believe that we can see an end to this. It looks, in the absence of anything changing, that the recovery from this collapse will be longer and more protracted than we've seen in either of 2009 or 2012. And that will simply compound the difficulties that are very real out there on farms. So everybody will have to play a part. Banks will have to play a part. Processors have to play a part. The supply trade into farms are going to have to play a part in order to try and manage people through what is undoubtedly going to be a very difficult period ahead.
Edmund Poots.
Thank you. It's somewhat ironic that we're facing the lowest prices in milk, as Northern Ireland is probably getting the best prices for beef, certainly vis-a-vis other parts of Europe. And in terms of that, you did mention going for premium products, and where everything's on the floor, everyone will take a hit. But the more premium product you have, the less impact the hit will have, the better equipped you'll be to cope with it. Where are we in terms of processors actually tapping into premium markets? I think you talked about the formula milk and so forth, so that we would be less impacted by the inevitable fluctuations that there will be in dairy products in years to come.
In the last, since the 2009 event, certainly there will have been a significant evolution in the product mix of the Northern Ireland dairy industry. Still hugely export dependent, yeah, but a better balance has been achieved between milk powders, cheese products, and the consumer products that are being sold predominantly within the UK. In times, however, of the gravity of the market changes that we have now seen in the last 9 months, no product gets insulated. We do inevitably find that the manufactured products of powders and cheese at the commodity end of the spectrum fall first in value. Yes. That then it gets translated across into cheese products as milk gets diverted from powders into cheese. Then it flows into food service contracts as food service providers renegotiate terms. And normally last to invoke will be the retail side of the business. So on your way into a crisis, normally you will see the commodity side fall first, with the lag effect being experienced on the retail side, which provides some insulation on the way in. On the way out of a crisis, it tends to be the reverse way. And you get a lag effect on the opposite side on the way out, with the commodities tend to get the lift first on the spot product basis. But from a premium perspective, that journey is continuing. The Northern Ireland dairy companies are working hard on the premium product side, but the value of all dairy products is going to be very materially affected by this event.
Do you accept that price volatility is a future which everybody who's in the business will have to build in? So whenever you get to the profitable times, you're going to have to store a bit away, because you're going to hit lean times inevitably, particularly in the light of the EU doing away with quotas.
Absolutely. We believe that as Europe diminishes and withdraws from market support mechanisms and very strong reluctance to utilise them, that we have to do a combination of things to better prepare our industry. One of those will be the evolution of the market risk management tools that we alluded to briefly earlier, but absolutely learning to be able to use reserves from the good times to support businesses in the bad times has to be part of the forward solution. In that context, I know that the Farmers Union are promoting opportunities to try and also manage out the way that cash flows are operated on tax, to allow people to smooth out that as well. So we need new thinking to deal with the new future. And there is, from a Northern Ireland perspective, we have also got a distance to go in that respect.
And given the fairly dramatic price falls there's been in oil, in grains, and more than likely fertiliser costs, consequence of the price in oil, do you think that those prices have been passed on to the farmers quickly enough? Because obviously, if you can save a couple of 50 litre in production, it certainly helps. But the other complaint I'm getting is that, particularly the meal companies, the prices were not dropping commensurate with. They were claiming to have forward bought, and therefore they couldn't reduce the price as quickly. But a lot of the farmers were less than accepting of that point of view.
Chairman, if I can answer that question in my capacity as a feed miller as well as a milk processor. Yeah, so the question's fair because it is very much a topic of conversation at farm level, and I think it's a wee bit of the same thing. When soya prices and input prices for animal feeds were at their highest, the forward contracts that were in place by millers shielded producers from those very high points in the raw material markets, and by the same token, on the way down, the forward contracts in place with millers delays or creates a lag effect in the spot market benefit breaching farm level. So the reduction in feed cost from a typical dairy ration from its high point in May 2013 to now translates into about 2.25 pence per litre. And by January 2015, that will all have been reflected back to farm level. What we have seen in the last 3 weeks has been a slight rebound on some of those raw material price increases in the context of maize, soya, wheat and barley. And where there would have been a significant expectation on the part of feed millers that come early 2015, there was scope for further price reductions. The prospect of that is not gone, but it is diminishing as we've seen some reversal in those grain markets.
And the big spring cost of fertiliser, what's anticipated there with the price of oil dropping? Is it going to drop significantly?
The prospect of pricing on fertilisers is probably less under the influence of our local farm supply businesses and more by the big manufacturers. And there are indications that those prices will be down. But again, there are question marks over whether they will be down in a proper reflection of where the oil markets have fallen. And we have seen fertiliser manufacturing get very much concentrated into relatively few hands. And those companies are very professional and well managed in the context of selling their fertiliser. They can realise the highest return for it. So, from that prospect, we do expect fertiliser prices to be lower, but we do not yet have visibility of exactly how much lower we might expect.
And how likely are export refunds and is intervention not inevitable? Because we'll have it locked, so the only way of actually dealing with it is actually take some of it out of the market, out of the system.
Yeah. The feedback that we get when we speak to the Commission is they're not keen on export refunds because there are budgetary implications for that. On intervention, as Trevor has said, intervention is open, it's there. The issue is this threshold price. But at the moment, there are no signals coming through from the Commission that they would be prepared to review the intervention price. Now, if you go back to 2009, when in January of that year, the Commission introduced intervention because it wasn't available at that time, they had to introduce it. And they introduced intervention and in combination with export refunds. Within a period of 2 or 3 months, the markets turned. So it was effective. The concern that was expressed at that time was that this was then going to store up a problem for further down the line, and that it would have an adverse effect on markets whenever that product then was fed back out onto the market. That didn't happen. And actually, you have to take your hat off to the Commission and say that they did an extremely good job of feeding this intervened product back onto the market in a way that didn't distort the market. The benefit to the Commission was that they made a lot of money out of it. Off the top of my head, that was something of the order of €800 million. So there's the opportunity to do the same again, to be able to make money, and then to offset that against export refunds, because it was the combination. And I think we need to remember that we're coming into a spring flush now in 2015, which will be the first in a generation where we've had that spring flush without quotas. So we need to make sure that there is not a build-up of product within the European Union. So therefore, we need those export refunds to be able to move product out of the European Union. And the only way that we can do that on a sustainable basis would be as a consequence of through the export refunds. But I think the other point that I would make in relation to these market support measures is that, given that where we are now in terms of market returns against cost of production, this is no longer just an issue of what can we do to support markets. This is an issue about the long-term sustainability of the dairy supply chain. Because if we don't get this injection of money into the dairy supply chain, then the inevitable is going to happen, that you'll have fatalities throughout the supply chain. It won't just be on farm side, it'll be in the processing side as well. So we need this injection of money that will come through intervention to get that into the supply chain so that we have a sustainable supply chain for the longer term. The European Commission have given a commitment that they want to be involved in ensuring that there is a food supply for a growing global population. Dairy has an important part to play in that. If we're going to be able to do that as a European Union, then we've got to have the sustainability in our dairy supply chain. And these mechanisms are a way of making sure that that happens.
Okay. Oliver McMullen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. Just a couple of things. On DEFRA, why are they less than sympathetic towards you? And I'm sure you'll welcome the Minister has released the single farm payment money, which will put something in the region of about 220 million into the economy by the end of December, which will be over 90% of farmers paid. But what is the problem with DEFRA? Because when you do talk about the existence not of the industry for the long term, but also the supply chain, I totally agree with you. Why are they less than sympathetic?
Well, I think DEFRA are very much influenced by the situation in Great Britain, where, as Trevor has said, the focus is much more on the local domestic market. If you look at the UK as a whole exports of dairy products, over half of those come from Northern Ireland. So we are the major region of the UK involved in dairy exports. The stance within DEFRA is that they are more concerned about the local domestic issues, and that the whole issue of export, they may play lip service to it, but they're driven more by the influence of the Treasury, who are in turn saying they want to reduce the European Union budget, and therefore why should we add to those sorts of concerns by encouraging the European Union to do something that they say may very well add to their budget concerns. So it's those combination of things, the fact that they're very much a GB-centric, GB-focused and the fact that the Treasury are saying we've got to reduce the EU budget, those are the two things that are driving the DEFRA stance.
And just on that there then, if this government drives to leave Europe, will leave you in a worse position, our worst position. So in reality, what's the best road that we can take here? What about your counterparts in the south of Ireland?
In the south of Ireland, we have typically found them to be good allies in the context of whatever issues were important to Northern Ireland agriculture were typically also important in the south. On this occasion, I suppose the south of Ireland have been pushing for so long to remove milk quotas to allow their industry to develop and grow that it is difficult in the context of trying to persuade the European Commission to alleviate the super levy position, which will almost inevitably follow for the Republic of Ireland, whilst at the same time arguing for market support measures to support falling prices. So I think in the particular circumstances that the South find themselves in, that on this occasion it's difficult to speak out of both sides of your mouth, because you're on one hand asking for the opportunity to grow and develop, but on the other hand would be asking for help. So on this occasion we are also without the support of the farming representatives and the industry representatives in the south of Ireland. And I think that's the biggest component to it. I think from a European perspective, agriculture in Northern Ireland and in the south are heavily dependent on exports. The consumers which we seek to serve are in GB and mainland Europe and further afield. And whilst Europe is far from perfect, and there are many things within Europe that we would love to see changed, I think the general consensus of the business community, at least within agriculture, would be that we need to be part of it and fighting from the inside rather than having no influence from the outside. And we believe that Northern Ireland agriculture would be materially worse off if we were to.
Okay, Chair, thank you for that.
Chair, thank you, and thanks for the presentation, folks. A couple of questions. Just you did note in your presentation that there's an increased global milk production over supply. How much has the milk production in the world increased over the last 12 months?
By just over 5% on a global basis. And I suppose the long-term trends were that global demand was increasing by about 2%. And the global supply for 2 years or 18 months there had been running at somewhere over 1%. But the production response we've seen to the favourable conditions has been that accelerate to something above 5% on a global basis, with individual regions being ahead of that. So we're very much running ahead of the demand side.
And is that set to increase with not only quotas being removed, but in other aspects as well? Like, is dairy cattle increased? Have their numbers increased significantly? Or?
It's certainly when we look at across the main milk producing regions in New Zealand, there are definitely more cows as land has been converted across from other types of agriculture, most typically sheep production, across to dairy. And in the space of the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen New Zealand increase their output probably by a billion litres a year, with this year probably going to finish north of 21 billion. In the US, we are seeing the US grow annually in milk output terms by the equivalent of a Northern Ireland. So when we look within Ireland, where we produce 2 billion litres in Northern Ireland and about 5 in the Republic, and we look at all the discussion that there is around a potential 50% increase in the south of Ireland. When you put that in relative terms to the US increasing by 2 or 3%, that is of much greater significance. So when we look at where the longer term threats are, we look towards the US, where their electricity cost is half of ours. Their labour costs are lower than ours. Their feed costs are lower than ours. And although there are a significant number of dairy farms in the US exiting, the growth in the existing and remaining herds and the growth in output from those farms is something that we believe is something that will be a much more significant influence on the global dairy situation than what happens within the island of Ireland. And that's where we would be more have greater concerns.
And when you look at within the European Union, at the number of 1- and 2-year-old dairy heifers in the main dairy regions and countries, you're seeing an increase, some quite significant increases in heifer numbers.
In relation to the reduction in China of milk that they were buying, reduced by half, why was that? Was that all because of that scare, or was it more to it than that?
I think from a Chinese perspective, we see this behaviour in a range of products. We would sell a number of other products to China, and in particular when China becomes a much more significant player in global terms as an importer, they will often build up stocks, and then they will stop buying or buy much less. And the markets collapse. We see it apply in the like of lamb skins, which is another product we sell to. And that seems to be the way that it evolves. For sure, in China there has been domestic difficulties with reputation of local brands. And I guess that when there was big, well-publicised events of several years ago, that was seen as quite a significant opportunity for external countries to sell into China because there was such distrust in the domestic brand. And that has happened. But the behaviour of the purchasing behaviour from China has been very erratic, and we have watched them buy very significant quantities of product. For 10 years ago, they may have bought about 50,000 tonne of product. Last year, they probably bought well over north of 1 million tonnes. So when you play that out on a global stage, they have a very significant influence on the sentiment in the world market. And we'll be watching earnestly to see whether they return in any significance to the marketplace in the early part of 2015.
What complicates the picture as well, I think, is that China now has a free trade agreement with New Zealand, and they have recently signed a free trade agreement with Australia. If you look at the New Zealand free trade agreement, it gives them a tariff, an import tariff advantage of somewhere of the origin of in the region of about 20% compared to where we're at for a fixed quantity of product. So the normal pattern of previous years, if there is such a thing as a normal pattern, has been that the Chinese importers would buy heavy in Q1 and Q2 to take advantage of these improved import tariffs, and then probably tail off a little bit later in the year. This year in Q1, Q2, they did forward buy, but obviously at very high prices, or prices higher than where they are now. And that may be one of the reasons why we're seeing that they're buying short at the moment. Obviously, the Chinese economy is not showing the growth levels that it had done previously. That will be having a knock-on effect. So one of the unknowns for the coming few months is what will be the buying pattern of the Chinese in Q1 and Q2. We just don't know, and it's difficult to predict.
Yeah. Okay. One final thing, just Chair, what sort of cooperation is there between the processors, the dairy processors in Northern Ireland?
I think in normal commercial terms, given the level of our exports, dairy processors in Northern Ireland typically don't compete with each other in the market side of their businesses that significantly because the world's our market. There has been greater competition between processors locally over the last 2 or 3 years on the raw material intake side of their businesses as we went through the evolution of the auction being removed and processors securing milk supply directly on contracts with their own producers. So we have on that raw material side seen greater competition over the last 2 or 3 years between processors. On the market side to a lesser extent. I think in the context of circumstances like this, from a crisis perspective and in terms of working together to produce the solutions that are needed on a macro level, whilst we clearly can't cooperate on anything around pricing for obvious reasons, we can cooperate around initiatives to try and ensure that we can get the necessary market supports and interventions in place to support the industry. At these types of situations, this is about the Northern Ireland dairy industry and the sustainability of it, as Mike has alluded to, as opposed to individual processors trying to gain and one up on each other.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair.
Sidney Anderson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation. Certainly the picture you paint is not a good one, Trevor, and we talk about the slowing down of the markets in China and Asia and such places. Can I ask you, what actual effect did the Russian ban have in the supply on in terms of the dairy products? Has that had a major effect, this Russian ban?
It's Northern Ireland dairy companies had direct exports to Russia were quite small. There were some cheese products being exported from Northern Ireland directly into Russia, but on small quantities. So in terms of a direct impact, it was arguably small. In relation to the indirect impact, it has been quite significant in that what undoubtedly was an already oversupplied market has probably in particular hastened the fall of skim milk powder prices within Europe as a proportion of that milk that was previously destined for cheese has been diverted into skim milk powder because it can be exported further afield than cheese. And that has had exaggerated the market position within Europe, and in member states very close to the Russian border it has had a very dramatic effect. Some member states have seen factory slows because their production was almost exclusively destined for Russia. But for us, I would say that the impact has been to serve to hasten the fall in the market price, particularly for skim milk powder.
Okay, so it hasn't had a drastic effect at you overall?
Well, it's hard to measure in the context of the oversupply situation generally, but I suppose suffice to say...
I'm trying to get it to work out now within the overall situation, how much this played into it,
It'd be difficult to put a figure on it, Sidney, other than to say, look, would things be as bad now at this juncture if Russia's ban was opened? No, not just as bad at this stage. But we would be heading in the same direction.
It wouldn't have a big effect and to turn things around, would you say, if that wasn't in place?
Oh, well, I think it will. If Russia's ban was reversed and
how much would that help?
Trade put back in again, it would get us to a recovery point quicker.
Okay.
Would that get us there 1 month, 2 months, 3 months quicker? Again, it's a very difficult thing to be able to precisely predict, but undoubtedly it would be a significant benefit to an overall market recovery.
You also talk about the serious situation, just quickly, Chair, that we're in. You talk about the number of players and that it revolves around here to try and get back to some sort of evening out of between supply and demand. But quite honestly, listening to this all and listening to this milk issue, how critical do you view this present situation? When you talk about the banks and single farm payments being paid on time and things like that, tax coming in on the back of maybe a better year and things like that, depending on weather, and there's a lot of things in play here. But if things were to go sort of in some way more downhill over this next few months, how critical to the dairy farming industry do you see that? Do you see farmers going out of business completely?
I think that there's, without wishing to be scaremongering about it, I think that there will be a very significant challenge on some farm businesses. And in the absence of support from banks, there's the real prospect that some milk businesses will be severely challenged in these times. We're very rapidly approaching the point where dairy farms, in terms of cash flow, would not, the milk check that will arrive will not even be, it'll not be large enough to pay the feed cost for the animals, not to mention any other costs on the business in terms of vets, in terms of even having a disposable income for themselves. The milk checks will not be able to pay the feed bill for the cows. And that's where we're getting very close to that point.
Is there any evidence to date that farmers are now pushed to the brink here into the wall that they would maybe leave as you say, exit the dairy farming altogether?
Well, probably the early indicators would be that some dairy farmers are approaching their milk buyers to seek advance payments on their milk checks. There are indications that dairy farmers who would have small loans with their dairy processors as well as with their banks are asking their dairy processors for holidays off the repayment of those loans. And there is a lot of indications that farmers are preparing their cash flow forecasts and sitting down with their banks and trying to give them the best view as to what the next 3 to 6 month period looks like. And the picture's not pretty. So we sincerely hope that this will not have the result of dairy farms going out of business, but the pressures on them will be extreme, and therefore the possibility of that happening cannot be ruled out, in the same way as dairy processors will be significantly challenged by this as well. And they will have their own real challenges again to get through to May and June time of next year.
Okay, thanks Trevor, and thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you very much, Trevor and Mike. Certainly, we have got a clear picture painted for us today. So, we as a committee will look at ways that we can help the Press Council to assure you that we will make decisions after you leave in regard to contacting various the Minister and all the various agencies. Okay.
That's appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Members, given what information we've received from Dairy UK in relation to the dairy sector, not only the farmer but also the processor and the pressure that obviously is going to come on them. There's a number of things that we can do. Should we write to the Minister expressing our concerns, but inquire, has the Minister been in touch with DEFRA and
the Commission?
And the Commission?
Yeah, Chairman, I think we should write formally to the Minister and write formally to the Agriculture Commissioner, both in Brussels.
Yeah, how serious it is for Northern Ireland, yeah.
I think, Chairman, we also should get the Ulster Farmers Union people maybe up again soon. I met Wesley Ashton out in the main hall earlier on. They've gone to see the Minister today on some of these matters.
Okay.
So I think
also, maybe we should write to the banks also.
I think so. I think that's a very important. The main agricultural debt rests with the dairy industry.
There's no doubt about that.
Because they're always able to pay it back. Well, mostly always able to pay it back. And suppose the other thing that whenever we're writing to the Minister, I think was to be pressed the single farm payment comes out as quickly and as
well, there's a lot of letters already been arrived, posted fairness to them, but it's very important to us. That's very important.
What's feedback?
Well, first of all, registry, so quite a few letters arrived in farm registry that their payments about, yesterday morning. Yeah, a lot of
I
farmers.
think there was the press release that 93% is expected by the end of December.
Yeah. Sure,
that was the press release.
Well, the Minister keeps talking about 93 and 95% and all that, but you know, the 5 or the 7%, they still need paid as well, and that's the difference. Those are important people. So
they are the big issue.
Yeah, they are
the ones that have had inspections and that.
Exactly. Focus on that, on the tail end. That's always the problem. Yeah.
just on that one, I think this is where Sydney is quite right. The pain is those that are not going to get
the real
payment. And I honestly believe that the department should give serious consideration this year, particularly given the cash flow problem that many farmers are in, that every person who made an application should be paid 75%, even in those cases where there is a dispute. At least it would allow them to have 75% of the cash, with the remainder to be sorted out as soon as possible.
I agree 100%, and it's something that I've raised on a number of occasions, but they do tell me, we can forward a letter to that effect, I think, but they do say that Europe does not allow for that. They seem to go...
Special case can be made if there's a will.
I will say that, that is right.
There's a will, there's a way.
Oliver, want to come in?
I think, Chair, you have to highlight the stance of DEFRA in the treatment of the milk industry. And you heard from yourself, they were treated less than favourably, and they are the big player in Europe. Now, they can open or close the door for the industry, and we can't overlook that. And their stance of what they're doing, the government's doing in England, is greatly affecting us here. And there's no hiding from that. You can dress that up and talk about it all, but that's the actual fact of it all. And I think we need to highlight that there. DEFRA really needs to be doing something to help the industry here. Everything else you've said, I agree with you, but I do think that they highlight to the Minister that DEFRA needs to be doing more for the industry here. The farmers' union should be told that as well.
I think most of them realise that. I think that is an issue.
But we need to be flagging that up, and we're flagging everything else up. We can't leave that out of it. That the government in Westminster is running an agenda of anti-Europe and moving out of Europe, etc. And this is affecting us. This is a byproduct of the Tory government. The minute on their stance in Europe, we're getting the backlash of this year. The farming industry is anyway.
I think what the contributors told us earlier, Northern Ireland feels the pain earlier because we export 85% of our product.
Exactly.
Other parts of Britain and Europe don't feel the pain as quickly, but inevitably will come to their door too, and right across Europe. But the problem we have 2 or 3 months in front of the rest, and you could see the pressure on the processors here, so there certainly is. The processors actually so far have cushioned. Processors, many of them are actually at a loss at the moment because they're paying more than they should be paying to farmers.
I think he made pains of saying
farmers haven't really seen the bad prices.
I think that gentleman made pains of saying that today. In a roundabout way, he did talk about what they've done before. I think he did mention what they're doing now.
Okay.
Going back to DEFRA, DEFRA have a big voice around the table in Europe. And that voice is less than sympathetic to us in Europe.
Do you want us directly to write to DEFRA or
I think you need to write to
really?
DEFRA.
I think it'll just
highlighting the damage that they're on.
Or do we write and our own minister, put pressure on our minister to ensure that DEFRA,
He put two issues to us today that in their view, in their considered opinion, that would help. One is that intervention would kick in, and that's available, but at the price that it's available isn't particularly helpful.
With a decent floor price.
So the floor price of intervention is an issue, and the other issue is export refunds, and we are much more liable than any other part of UK because we export so much of our product. All the rest of them have the consumers there to take it up. So if we're writing to DEFRA, it should be on those two subjects, that we're looking for support for export refunds and that we're looking for support for a higher intervention price. The last time the intervention price was used,
2003 prices,
but they made 800 million euros from it. So it's not unreasonable to say, and that even an intervention floor price of 20 or 21 pence, which is still a loss to the farmers, would not be unreasonable.
Probably 21 pence would in real terms wouldn't be as high a price as 2006 as the prices today. That's right. That's right. Because you're talking about almost 12 years now.
We're probably better not suggesting a price.
No, absolutely not.
But the current floor price isn't.
What do I say is still like
I think I've got that. We're going to write to the Minister expressing the committee concerns and urging her to be in touch with DEFRA on this issue. We're going to write to DEFRA separately, saying that we, in terms of the intervention and the export grant refund, we're going to write to the European Commissioner on this. You want to get the UFU up again?
I think it's important to get them as soon as possible.
Okay.
So we also can sort of...
We'll have to do it next week if we could.
Well, next week's, but that's a long meeting, that's fine.
Well, we're going to do it
Yeah.
There's no point in waiting after
Right,
Christmas.
right to the banks, and in terms of the minister, a letter to the minister, we want to ask also in terms of the focus on getting the tail end, the inspected cases paid as soon as possible, with consideration given to advance payments.
Okay. The other issue was said we're right to the banks.
Yeah, the
You're happy
banks,
not to do that?
right,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I think when we're doing that there, we should write to our MLA, or MEPs,
MEPs?
I think so too. I think there's no harm in that,
MEPs,
yeah.
but do no harm, yeah.
just to let them know where
You
the
copy them
feeling
onto
is.
the letter that you're sending to the Commissioner, probably.
Yeah.
Are we writing to the European Commission?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do that. Everyone happy?
On the same points, Edwin, about the intervention
On the fact
and the
that
expert phone.
Like, I'll be honest, having an Irish European Commissioner in Agriculture is to our advantage, and it's making direct contact.
I think actually the Republic, while they have stayed out of this so far because they're looking to increase production and that's why they don't want to go to Europe, the difficulty they're going to be hit with the same low prices as us and they're going to feel the pain very soon too. Very quickly. So I mean,
Yeah, but we need an ally in Europe,
oh no, yeah,
and we're not getting it from
totally.
we're not getting it from the government. We possibly can get it from other people, but because that man there was quite, an unsympathetic reception they got from the European side of things, from DEFRA.
Is that okay?
Okay.
Tom, do you want to say?
Chair, just, well, it's quite a list there that we're doing.
It is, I understand that.
And it's a bit of a scattergun approach, I have to say.
I think one letter's going to be
I
any good.
quite honestly think that DEFRA will just shake it back and say, look, use of devolution, get on with it yourselves. I do think we should be urging our own minister and department to be putting more pressure on DEFRA. That's where
That's where we're going.
the focus must come
And
from.
our MP.
Because clearly the Committee of Agriculture here isn't going to have a great lot of sway with the DEFRA.
Yeah.
Whereas we do need to put in pressure on our own minister to pressurise DEFRA into taking those decisions that will get the export refunds and the intervention in Europe resolved. So,
The problem with DEFRA is DEFRA is not affected. The UK has 55% of their product going into the fresh market, so they're not affected to the same extent, and that's why they're not. Partly why they're not.
but it's really up to our department to make this case.
Oh,
And we've got to press them.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
That's totally right, but
Yeah.
the letters going off is also helping the minister too, because the people will know what we're on about.
And these letters, do you want to try and get these away as soon as possible, or
Well,
does everybody need to see them, or we just need to be...
Oh, no,
Oh, no, we'll trust you, Chairman, and the clerk to...
Is that okay?
Yes, no problem.
Okay.
we have confidence in your abilities.
Right.
Okay. Everyone happy now?
Mark?
Move on to agenda item 8, oral briefing, DARD mid-year progress report on the DARD 2014-15 business plan targets. I refer members to the memo from the clerk at page 87 to 93, and papers from the department at pages 94 to 157. And I welcome, just arriving, Graham Wilkinson, Assistant Secretary, Colette McMaster, Assistant Secretary, Pauline Keegan, also Assistant Secretary. You're all very welcome. And can I just ask you to take up to 10 minutes for your briefing, please?
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Ask some questions, okay?
As you say, I'm here to present on the mid-year progress report in relation to the Department's 14 to 15 business plan, and also provide members with an update on the Department's commitments under the programme for government. Hopefully you've had an opportunity to review the report provided, and as in previous reports we provided members with a summary of the progress to date against each of the business plan targets, as well as those actions that are planned for the current quarter. There is indeed quite a bit of detail included in the report. However, we believe this is necessary in order to provide members with as full a picture as possible, and also to provide you with a justification for the RAG status which has been applied. I'm conscious that members will want to explore the report in some more detail. I'll therefore ask Pauline and Colette to come along today to answer any specific questions that you might have. Whilst we'll address the questions as far as possible, if we are unable to do so, we will come back to the committee in writing. The report itself follows a similar format, and you'll be well used to it by now. So in Appendix A, we have set out the detailed information against each of the targets. And then at Appendix B, we've set out the detailed financial information. I've also included in your packs the report against the Programme for Government targets, and that's set out at Appendix C to F of your packs. We've also included Appendix G, the 10 corporate plan milestones which haven't been reflected in the business plan targets. Chair, could I begin with the Programme for Government targets? And you'll see from the information provided that 3 of the commitments are being reported as green and 1 is as amber green. The green targets include the eradication of brucellosis in cattle, the various measures to tackle poverty and social and economic isolation, or TRIPSI as it's known, and the development of a strategic plan for the agri-food sector, which is now being taken forward under the Going for Growth recommendations. The 1 amber green target is in relation to the relocation project. As you'll see from the various highlighted reports, on particularly the one on brucellosis, the position remains unchanged from the last time we presented to the committee. And as we confirmed then, the annual confirmed herd incidence reached 0 back on the 28th of February 2013, with the last case confirmed in February 2012. If this position is maintained, a submission will go forward to the European Commission in advance of the 31st of March 2015 in order to seek official brucellosis status. In regard to the commitment to spend £5 million under the TRIPSI programme, this will bring the cumulative expenditure up to £10 million. And as you'll see from our commitment, we intend to spend £13 million over the Programme for Government period, out to 31st of March 2015. And you'll note from the report that to date we've spent £2 million in 2014-15. Chair, whilst I don't want to steal Pauline's thunder, I think it's worth highlighting some of the key achievements that we have secured with the £10 million investment. And that includes 12,600 households which have been visited under the MARA project, or Maximising Access in Rural Areas. 6,000 health checks carried out over 283 locations, and that includes 187 farmers' markets and 96 community venues. Also, 67,000 contacts made to under the Connecting Elderly Rural Isolated project. In addition, the programme has made a positive impact for younger people as well. And just to quote some of the statistics there, 1,130 unemployed young people have been supported through the Boost Youth Employment Programme, and 509 young people have been engaged in the Rural Youth Entrepreneurship Scheme. Clearly, this investment is making a difference to all ages of people living in rural areas. And as you heard last week, the programme will continue to receive funding in the Department's 2015-16 budget proposals. In relation to Going for Growth, the departments, including DARD, continue to progress the various actions as agreed by the Executive. I'm aware that following a presentation to the ARD Committee on the 14th of October, given by the Agri-Food Strategy Board Chair, and the subsequent publication of the Executive's response, the Committee has asked to ensure that you receive regular update reports on progress against this target. The Committee has received a confirmation from the Department that a monitoring and reporting process is currently being developed in conjunction with the Agri-Food Strategy Board, and DARD will ensure the Committee receives regular progress reports. Members will also be aware that an important element of the Department's response is the Farm Business Improvement Scheme. A strategic outline case has been prepared, and an initial allocation of funding has been proposed of £3 million in our 15-16 budget proposals. The proposals are subject to the EU approval of the new Rural Development Programme, and the completion of the necessary outline business cases needs to be completed before the launch can proceed. As far as the commitment to advance the relocation of the DARD headquarters to a rural location is concerned, and where the committee did receive a full briefing on the 18th of November, you'll therefore be aware that the majority of the department's moves will be completed in the next financial year, with Fisheries and Forest Service moving in June 2015. The remainder of the departmental headquarters will relocate to Ballykelly with 400 workstations by the end of 2017. This commitment has been classified as amber green as a consequence of the delay in the business case process. Chair, turning to the business plan targets, you'll note that we have identified, of the 43 targets, 28 were classified as green, 8 as amber green, 6 amber and 1 as red. I don't intend to go through all of them, but I'll just give you a couple of highlights. The one target that has been identified as red is in relation to the staff absenteeism target. The indication at 30th September was that Dard would achieve 9.9 days lost per staff against the Minister's target of 7.5. Since then, NISRA has produced a further report which has indicated that the number of days will be 10.5 per staff member against the 7.5 target. HR staff within the department are taking all steps that are possible within the NICS procedures and in terms of making sure that staff can return to work when they're fit to do so. There are also a number of additional measures that the department is taking in order to monitor compliance. However, the initial review has indicated a number of weaknesses and these are being currently considered by the top management group in the department. I'd also like to highlight in the interim report since the 30th of September in relation to the target for the Rural Development Programme, that has since moved from green to red as a result of confirmation from the Commission that they were unable to approve all programmes by the end of 2014. While any delay in the approval process is indeed disappointing, it will not affect the continuing work of the Department in obtaining the necessary approvals for business cases and developing the schemes. We'll continue to work to open the schemes as early as possible in order to have those in place. Of the 6, there are 6 amber targets within our report, and that includes the Rivers Agency maintenance of culverts, the issue on the affordability of the NIFAS project, access to updated farm maps, the provisional outturn figure in our finances, the implementation of our asset management plan, and a number of EQIAs which have been delayed. Finally, as I mentioned, Chair, that we have included some financial information in the packs, which is at Appendix B, and again we have included that as an amber green target there because of the delays in the EFF programme. So that concludes my introductory comments. I'm more than happy to take any questions that you might have.
Oh, thank you very much, Ken. Can I take you to Goal 5 on Target 2 on page 34 of your papers? This is about the meeting the target of remote sensing claims in December. Your information is at the end, as was at the end of 2014, September 2014. Can you ask you to update us on where this target is now sitting? The target was to complete at least 500 claims for single farm payment in December 2014 that had been subject to remote sensing. That was a big issue last year for many people that remote sensing wasn't paid for some considerable time. What is the situation as it stands?
That's right, Chair. There were some issues on that, and we have given the commitment to ensure that those 500 are completed. The process, as I'm sure you're aware, is we are making payments on single farm payment, and these payments will be part of that process. We have until the 9th of December to get all of the various bits and pieces sorted out. So we are working very hard to make sure that happens, and I know that they are very close to achieving the 500 target, but we'll not know the outcome of that until the 9th of December.
You hope to be very close to that? You hope to be?
We do, yes. Yes.
Okay. Can I have a discussion about Goal 5, Target 2 regarding the AFB estate? This mentions work ongoing at Loughgall and Newforge Lane around what happens on those sites. Can we explore this first? What do you think regarding the redevelopment of the Loughgall site? It's very close to me, all the way from where I live.
Certainly, Chair, we are working very closely with the AFB board in terms of developing their plans. And going back to the recent NIAO report on AFB, it clearly identified the significant costs that AFB have in relation to their estate. So we're very keen to make sure that the organisation is as efficient as it possibly can be, and therefore we need to look at the platform costs associated with that. So we have engaged with the Strategic Investment Board to develop those plans, and as I say, we're engaging with the AFB board very closely. At this stage, we are looking at the various business cases, and we're developing those. And we'd want to be in a better position, certainly early next year, to make some decisions around the AFB estate and its development. Certainly we see the potential for Invest to Save funding to modernise the AFB estate and make sure that it is fit for purpose. There are a number of factors that influence that as well. I mean, in terms of the need going forward, we're acutely aware of the reduction in public sector funding, but also the opportunities that AFB have to actually grow their business. And ultimately it'll be for the AFB board to determine the shape and size of their estate going forward based on their need. And that'll be informed by the business decisions around all of that. So there's much work to be done in terms of making decisions around the AFB estate, making sure it's fit for purpose, and making sure that it is of the right size in order to meet their future needs.
AFB is now expected to raise 2 million by outsourcing. Some of their funding of outsourcing to raise 2 million within that sector. I do see today there's a number of issues here where there's some significant increases in what their charges are. Does AFB make that decision themselves, is it?
Well, certainly the department has a role in setting fees and charges for some of the work that is conducted, particularly around animal disease and control. Where the department has a role to play in that. Where there's work outside of that, then AFB will ultimately set the fees for the research and that type of work that they carry out to make sure that they recover the full costs of that. There are rules in terms of managing public money that we're required to adhere to, making sure that the full costs are recovered where we are carrying out work on behalf of a third party. So there's a bit of a mixture there in terms of what's the responsibility of DARD and what's the responsibility of AFB in setting fees.
Okay, just because I do see that there's a number of increases, most of them's around 40, 34, 48% in relation to eggs and sampling of eggs. But there's one in particular, see 118.99% increase, which seems very high compared to the rest. Yeah. But again, that's for testing of eggs, 4,000 eggs, so it's something we can look at later. Okay, Joe Byrne.
Thanks, Chairman. Well, working on the report, Chairman, obviously there are 25 green targets achieved or on track to be lowered. But in relation to Goal 5, Target 9, the days absent per employee, the target was 7.5, and now it appears that working is going to be 10.5. How does that compare with other departments, and why is it slipping? Thanks, John.
Well, to answer your first question, Joe, I think it is comparable with other departments. It wouldn't be for me to comment on other departments specifically, but I do know that this is not just an issue that is specific and unique to DARD. My understanding is that we are probably in the middle of departments' performances in terms of the overall performance of our sickness absence. So it is a concern, and the last time that I was at the committee, we were seeing a downward trend, and it had reduced from I think it was 9.4 down to 9.1. We're now seeing that reversing, and it's now projecting up to 10.5. So it is a concern. And as a result of that, we have introduced additional reporting mechanisms within the department to ensure that all managers within the department are actually doing the things that they're supposed to be doing. They're making sure that absences are reported on the system, that they're having the regular interviews with staff to make sure that they're aware of the various arrangements that are in place. But we're also making sure that any support that we can have for staff is put in place to make sure that they're brought back to work as quickly as possible. So it is a concern. We're alert to that, and we're doing everything possible within the rules that are set in place by corporate HR.
Would that mean is there some sort of a managerial intervention strategy to try and get back on target?
Yes, that's what I'm saying, is that we are increasing the level of reporting in terms of making sure managers are following the proper processes, that they are making sure that all of the warnings on HR Connect are adhered to, and taking the appropriate action where it's necessary to do that. It is being highlighted at the top management group and at the departmental board because of the increasing incidence of sickness absence across the department. And what I would add to that is that, looking at the statistics within the department, we do have a fairly high incidence of long-term sickness. We currently have around 72 staff that are off on long-term sickness, and that is giving rise to the higher figures. So we're scrutinising the figures, we're analysing it and taking action where we can to. So any intervention that we can, we are taking that action.
Thanks. Goal 5, Target 5, the EU financial corrections. Jared advises here that the target is amber due to funding, IT development, data capture needs and time. Seems a fair collection of reasons. Which is the real reason?
No, I think those are the key issues that we are addressing. I suppose since this report was presented, things have moved on significantly, in that we've had the allocation in our budget for 15-16, which is very significant for us in terms of the 6.3 million that was allocated to this programme. So that puts us in a much stronger position. We've also invested very significantly in the IT in our 15-16 proposals. So whilst I wouldn't underestimate the challenges that there are here, the funding will go a long way to addressing some of the concerns that were identified. It's a very significant challenge for us. We're going to have a new scheme being introduced that is much more complicated than the current scheme, but we have the investment in place now, and we think we are in a much stronger position in terms of implementing it.
And was the funding impacting on IT development, or was it other resource limitations?
Certainly my understanding, Joe, is that the funding was the key issue in terms of delivering it, and now that has been addressed, we would want to see progress being made.
Thanks, Joe.
Okay, Declan McAleer.
Chair, thank you. I'm just in relation to goal 5, target 5, made reference to the updated maps for in advance of the claims in 2015. Are you satisfied that you are well on course for that? That all farmers have got their updated maps?
That's my understanding. The maps have been issued. We're not hearing any major complaints coming back from the farmers that they haven't received their maps. Are there any major concerns with that? There may be individual circumstances, but we'll obviously deal with those on a case-by-case basis. So it seems to have gone relatively well.
Yeah, and I'm picking up from certainly press release yesterday that you have exceeded the target in terms of getting the single farm payments issued in December, right? Well, 90% in December. We were hoping, or 93%.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, hopefully this will be. Well, we believe it's a good thing for farmers to have that single farm payment.
Will you
now.
exceed the 90? Will you hit the 93 in December? 93%, or there's over 90%?
It's in excess of 90%. On Monday, we had it's 91.3% that we had issued on Monday, which equates to £223 million. So we shouldn't be too far away from our target whenever the tally is added up.
And you see the target of the Goal 5 target 2 for the people who have been subjected to the remote sensing. Will you be able to meet or exceed that 500? Because that's obviously a big bone of contention and people who have been chosen.
Well, absolutely. And that, the question that the Chair asked initially, we're still have to the 9th of December to actually get all of our information on the system, and I know the staff back in the department are working very hard to make sure that we achieve it. We're very close, but whenever I asked yesterday, we just weren't quite at the 500, but we're getting much closer to it.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Tom Elliott.
Chair, thank you, and thanks for the presentation. Just wondering, how are the assessments made as to what targets fall into, whether it's red, amber or green?
That's assessment is made by the individual business areas, which is then presented to myself, and then I present that to the departmental board and the minister.
So it's the departmental head assessing themselves?
Absolutely, and certainly as part of this committee we've been through that process, and this is why you have a very detailed report in making sure that the justification for the red, amber, green assessment is accurate, and the role of this committee is to scrutinise us if you don't believe that our assessment is an accurate one.
Yeah, obviously it's slightly easier where there are definitive targets or figures to meet, much less in some of the subjective aspects. And I suppose we'll never go into all the detail today. But just I think it was somebody mentioned the mapping system. I think it was Declan mentioned the mapping system. How do you assess that it falls into maybe green when farmers have had to comply with 4 different maps over the last probably 10 years? You know, maybe this target of them meeting the mapping system and getting it out in whatever date was set has worked.
Yeah.
But overall, impact on the farming community or on your customers, which is the farmers, does that be taken into any consideration?
I agree there's a degree of subjectivity, and what we have been trying to do over the last number of years is make sure that the targets are easily measurable. We make them smart. So certainly is a role of the committee is making sure that
farmers may say they're not very smart.
You know, what we have, and hopefully you will see from the targets, we have included a lot of numbers in there to make sure that they are measurable and they are specific. And we've come along to the committee before we actually set the targets, and part of that process is about making sure that the committee holds us to account in setting those targets, that they are robust, that they are specific, and that we, you know, can make sure that they're easily recorded as red, amber or green. There is a challenge in all of that, I accept, but you know, hopefully we have moved the process forward and it is a bit more robust in terms of the recording of our performance against our targets.
I can't recall what the what area the headquarters move had fallen into. It does include the Rivers Agency and Forestry Service as well.
Yep.
But I think it was green or green amber gone into from memory. Just don't have it.
Yes, it's goal 2, target 2, and we are reporting that as green, as the various actions are being progressed as we intended in the 14-15.
When was the announcement made for Forest Service to go down to Skillen? Am I right in saying that was 2010?
No, it was after that.
Was
that
it?
date? Yes.
12.
When was it?
It was 12.
2012. And was there a date set for that move to take place at that time?
I'm not sure. That was a Balmoral announcement. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't think there was a
actually
specific
date
date was announced at that time. It was very early in the process, so we needed to work through in terms of the staff moves and the actual we didn't actually say, we didn't know where the accommodation was going to be, so we actually had to find somewhere to actually accommodate.
But in general terms, would you say that after 2.5 years, that without a huge amount of progress, without that move going to take place shortly, that would fall into green?
I think certainly in terms of the preparedness and the actions being taken, Forest Services is well ahead on that. I mean, I know Malcolm is making good progress on that, and things are progressing well. Would we have wanted to be quicker? Probably. But whenever you're looking to move that number of staff to a significantly different area, we do take into account the individual staff within the department and the process to move the staff. But in terms of the overall accommodation, I'm certainly aware that is progressing well, and that is available.
Okay, but you still feel it's agreed and it's progressing?
Certainly, yes. I mean, the actions that we had planned to do in 14-15 are being implemented.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, Joanne Dobson.
Thank you, Chair. Can I apologise for missing your briefing? So my question may already have been covered, Graham. In relation to Goal 1, Target 9, I think it's page 107, the adoption of technology by 1,500 agri-food businesses. You've said you've achieved 286, which by my reckoning is about 19%. Can you explain why this is so low?
Certainly, Joanna, it is low, and we are concerned about actually achieving this target. The key part of our issue is one of a resourcing one, in that a huge number of John Fay staff have had to be taken off this work to make sure that the level 2 qualification training is completed. So it is low. We are concerned about actually achieving this by the year end, given the large volume of staff that are required to carry out the level 2 qualification.
Yeah, I note, Graham, you do cite the delivery of the level 2 young farmers qualification as the reason for the slow progress, which obviously is being prioritised. When will CAFRE finish their review? And suppose on hindsight, why have you set this as an amber green, which is said to be broadly on track and easily redeemable? On reflection, would you perhaps have regraded this, maybe to a red? Or
well, I think given what we know now at this point in the year, it's definitely amber red is probably a more accurate assessment. But that was our assessment at that particular point in time. There is definitely a risk that will not be achieved by the year end.
Okay, so it would be more red if not, you would think now it would be
Whoever
red.
reporting it now, it would be more red, yes.
Okay. Staff sickness together has already been covered.
Okay, is that okay then?
Yeah.
Well,
Yep,
okay.
it's fine, yep.
Hey, Graham, on Appleagall and Newfords Lane, an outline business case is available. Will you come back to this committee?
Certainly, Chair, yes. Yep.
Okay, 'cause it's something.
That'll be sometime in the new year.
That's okay. That's okay. Just a matter of interest. See, we have a letter here of correspondence from the Minister in regard to the net financial correction in regard to mapping is anticipated to be about 2.6 million instead of 47.9 million, which is good news. So that'll be 45.3 million. Les, are you aware of this? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, okay. Over 3 years, okay? That 47 million or 45 million will have been set aside for that payment. What happens to that money now?
Well, the 47 million is, some of that has already been paid over. We do have accrued for some of that in our balance sheet. However, we do need to account for the 2013 and the 2014 scheme years as well. Now, we have released some of that money back to the executive. Just over £4 million has been released back as part of the October monitoring round process. So that has been dealt with. There may be more adjustments required, but that'll be done as part of the year-end accounts process.
Okay. Yeah, well, as I read it here, it's €2.6 million now is the figure for 2010, 11 and 12, and the figure of just under 47 million incurred for the previous 3 years. Compared to the figure was 47.9 million, so that's £43 million, quite a bit receiving there. Am I right? Am I wrong?
No, I mean, some of the 45 million would have been already paid over to the Commission. So
really not over back to you then? No. Even though
we had accrued for the 2010, 11 and 12 scheme years, we had accrued, I think it was around £27 million.
Okay.
They're now saying that the bill is around £2 million, so there's a difference there of 25 million. Now we need to.
Will they take it off all there?
Well, we need to accrue for the 2013 and the 2014 scheme years, so that'll mop up a significant proportion of that.
Not in mapping some other fields, is that what you know? No.
These are the new scheme years.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Move on to agenda item 9, written briefing regarding the nuisance fees amendment regulations in Northern Ireland 2015. Can I refer members to the memo from the clerk at pages 160 to 162 and papers from the department at pages 163 to 182. I advise members that the Department is proposing a 6-week public consultation on the amendment to the regulations. The purpose of the amendment is to update the regulations to amend the fees charged to the poultry industry to ensure full cost recovery. The proposed increase in fees is greater than in previous years due to the introduction of the new AFB strategic cost model. The 6-week consultation is considered adequate. The regulations will only be relevant to a small number of stakeholders, and traditionally responses are normally low. We seek members' comments on that. Members looking at that. No comments?
That's okay.
It's okay. Can I seek members' agreement that the Department returns to the committee with analysis of the responses upon completion of the consultation exercise? Okay. Okay. Agenda item 10. Agenda item 10, Budget 2015-16 Committee response. Members will recall that the meeting last week we discussed the budget and agreed that the clerk would draft a response to the committee and bring it for agreement. Can I refer members to the draft response at page 184 to 190 and the draft budget at page 191 to 229? Can I also refer members to the Hansard of the budget session from last week's meeting, which has been tabled? Can I suggest that we take 5 minutes to allow members to read the draft? We'll then agree the response page by page. Any amendments will be made by the clerk as this needs to go to the committee for finance personnel will be closed of play today. You will want to go through page at a time and give each one a few seconds to read each page individually. I ask members to agree at the first page at 184. Quick look at it. Okay, and give me a second or two to read that page, please.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, thanks.
Page 184, is everyone content with that? You want another second?
Just Chair, we haven't had an update on the staff over 60 years of age. I know 1,720 as discussed over 55, and we're still waiting to find out the number of staff over 60. And obviously,
We haven't had the reply.
haven't had the reply
No,
yet.
but I don't think that's important to this letter. Like.
No, I'm just curious if that's been forthcoming.
Happy with page 184, members?
Just a point of clarity, are we looking through this here from the perspective that it actually reflects the discussion we had last week, or can it be amended even now?
Can be amended even now. I mean, but this is to reflect the views of the committee. It goes to the Committee for Finance and Personnel, and that will be made into our Committee for Finance and Personnel report, which will be debated in the Chamber on the 12th of January. So this is the committee view that will be in the report, and this is the committee view that the chairperson will reflect. So it is to reflect the committee view per se. And it may not be.
That's why we're asking for agreement for each page. So I mean, you understand we're going through page by page to make sure everyone's happy with what's there.
Committee view. So if you want something added, then the
See in point 2, can we also include wider rural community, farmers and wider rural community?
Frontline services, farmers and wider rural community. People happy with that? Yeah.
I don't think there's an issue with that.
No.
Okay. Move on to page 185 then.
Mr. Chair, just before we go on, that staff three, that item 3 staff reduction, I don't know that. Well, certainly I'm not really happy with what they're proposing there. But is there anything that we can do at this stage? They're proposing to
voluntary access scheme. No one will be made redundant.
Well, that's the only consolation. But having said that, the fact that they're going to look for 300 people to be made redundant.
Yeah.
Well, that would concern me. But if there's any other alternative, You do say, it says there somewhere that it would be voluntary.
Yeah.
What happens if they don't get the 300 voluntary? Are they going to then take to?
That's actually covered at point 8. There's 4 bullet points there. And the very last bullet point, which is on page 186, covers what would happen if the full redundancies are not realised.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, that's sorry, I know we're doing it page by page, but you sort of need to read it.
Okay.
Is that okay, Kieran? Is that strong enough for you?
Well, yeah, okay, but I just want to record my concern about what's happening. And then, okay, that's on page 1. On page 2 at the top.
Page 2, go ahead.
We're talking about staff over the age of 60. Are we not moving into age discrimination fact here?
There's only, I think some person asked for a matter of interest. This was nothing to do with age. I think some of the members had asked for clarification on. They'd asked how many members were over 55. Someone had asked how many members over 60.
Chair, I think the basis of that, was it not that the exit scheme, there was some suggestion that the exit scheme may be linked to staff age groups, you know, so if you fell into a certain age bracket, you maybe qualify for the exit scheme. If you fell into another bracket, you may not. And there was some suggestion, I don't know how accurate all that is, but I think that's where that query came from. I don't think we were trying to suggest any age discrimination.
Or some suggestion that maybe those in those 2 age brackets would be more welcoming of such a scheme, and younger people as well.
Right. Okay.
So, and that's why I mean I think that was the point isn't being made there. It's just being left there that if people at 55 years of age are seen to be welcoming the scheme, then there's more people in the department who would welcome the scheme than wouldn't.
Right. Okay.
Well, that's right. Okay. Page 185. I'll read the rest of that, please. Be 185 then. Okay. Okay, move on to 186, please.
Chair, 186 and leading on to 187 is the inspections. DARD and DOE have for a long time been saying that, you know, they're looking for a single inspection regime, and you know it's ongoing for years. And I would have just liked to seen us being a wee bit more firmer in our response on that. I know there's quite a bit in there on it, but I haven't a wording or anything, to be fair, but somewhere at point 14, which I know we've jumped on to 187 page, but it's on the one section.
I mean, I can put in something like the committee would strongly recommend that the department engage in further talks with DOE on this issue. Okay, let me just say, committee.
Can I come on the back of what Tom's after bringing there? And that is exactly the point that I brought up at question time today to the Minister. And he told me that he's carrying out a root and branch inspection of the Environment Agency to make them more customer friendly and to look at some of the practices that they currently use. I brought up one particular one in the farming industry. He did say that he's currently looking at their practices and to make them more customer friendly. Now, I think that's not a bad thing, because it was raised last meeting here that some of the times when they go out really, and they put a lot of fear into the farming community. According to the Minister today, he's looking at that and to see where that can be improved on. It was on the topic, I asked it on the topic of today, so that might be something we can keep bear in mind.
Okay, so you're happy with that last amendment? Paragraph 4.
186 and 187, everyone happy then? Go on. Sure, okay. 188.
On 188, Chair, if I can, on the tackling rural poverty and social isolation. At the bottom of 188,
188 or 189?
188, or, sorry, 189, I just seen 189 in the corner here. Why jumping ahead? I'll wait till 188 is finished, all right.
188 is fine, yeah.
Everyone happy 188 then? Okay.
Happy as can be.
All right, we want to 189.
That is very concerning.
On 189, I think there needs to be something in there to the rural white reference to the rural white paper that are all departments or ministries signed up to, everybody signed up to the, are they really rural proofing any of all their decisions?
Maybe something along the lines that given the range of budget cuts across other departments, the committee would ask the Minister to ensure that commitment to the rural white paper is still in place.
From all other departments,
Okay.
and are they rural proofing their budget?
This is about the budget rather than about.
I would see rural proofing, if they're cutting budgets, are they looking at, are they rural proofing some of their decisions? Which would be very important if it comes to rural isolation and tackling rural poverty and rural social isolation.
Tell them I'll read this out again, make sure everyone's content.
Rural white paper and its impact on rural. Okay, I am suggesting something like at the end of 24 there, given the range of cuts across all government departments, the committee recommend that the department look at one first, or of the other departments' continuous commitment to the rural white paper and to impact on rural services and rural proofing.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can have it there, or even.
I might tidy that up a wee bit when I see it again, okay?
You can even stick it.
It has to be waited this afternoon, is that right?
Yeah, I'll get it, yeah.
Okay.
Even stick it in at 190 there at the very bottom of 190. Just,
I'll put it in there under.
yeah, okay, that's fine,
Yeah,
that's fine.
Okay.
Yep.
189. Move on to 190.
Make sure that TV is out.
You see that 190 at the start, that is, it is also important to note that the budget reduction faced by the block grant is not a wee bit back to front.
That is an actual quote. That's not something that's an actual, but it's in italics and commas like that, and verticals like that. It's actually what the officials say.
Yeah. So we would also need to, then we would need to build that into our statement that we are facing budget reductions because of the cut in the block grant. You know, that needs to be in there as well.
It's already in here. Well, it's also important to note that the budget reduction faced by the block grant is not one.
One-off reduction?
Yeah.
Is that enough for you?
I think it's quite clear.
But it's a wee bit, you know, the wording of it's a wee bit back to front. You know, it's also important that the block grant reduction faced by the block grant.
But it's clearly saying it is important to note that the budget reduction faced by the block grant,
Yeah.
not a one-off reduction. So
What's it saying? It's not saying that.
it's saying that the budget reduction is because of the block grant, is what I'm, because of the block grant reduction. That's what I'm reading it.
It's not saying because of that. I know what you're reading, but it's not saying that. It needs to say that it's the block, that the budget reductions are the byproduct of a cut in the block grant. That's what we need to be getting.
You can
If you read, no matter what way you read that there,
I can't change
it actually doesn't make sense.
That's an actual wording, so, you know, we can't change that. All right.
That's actually what somebody said. Up in italics is what somebody actually
Yeah.
said.
Somebody's clearly said that there to.
Yeah, well, it's
Separate, that one.
I don't think there's any It's straightforward enough, I think it wouldn't be hard to understand.
I don't know about that. Go ahead.
Do you want me to put that into an actual sentence? In paragraph 25 somewhere, officials noted that the budget reductions being faced by DARD were as a result of reductions in the block grant.
Okay, that's fine.
Would that be?
All right.
Okay, let me just write that down.
You put it into the last paragraph then, before that. That's just.
You could also argue that by the relocation of the whole works to Derry or wherever it's going, Ballykelly, that we could, if we hold off for a year or two, we could save that money. And we wouldn't have to do what's being proposed, but there you go.
Surely that's protected, but
Well,
There is a wee bit there, Kieran, at point 11
I thought there was.
about relocations.
As
It doesn't say what you're saying now, but
you know what I mean?
I do.
Penny didn't tell me to say that last week.
Right,
I actually
okay.
thought it would be something that you would tell me to say, and you didn't, so I couldn't put it in.
Anyway, we weren't going to win that argument anyway, I don't think so.
is there anywhere in that there that we should say that that there needs to be more online applications to speed up the payment process? Now, we know how successful that has been up to date, you know, but we need more to improve that 93%.
Chair, is that not more of around the policy issue though, as opposed to the budget?
I guess that's more saving from departmental concern more than, it'll not speed up, I don't think it'll speed up payments or such.
Well, that's the whole thing you see in there on payments there, on the single farm payments and that there. One of the things that we could get more money out if we could get more online applications, but if you do think it's a policy thing, that's fine, but I'm just flagging that up. I thought
Part of the questioning by this committee revealed that going more online and going more digital is one of the reasons why they think they can do with less staff. So I
That's
could
right.
put that in round about paragraph 5 or 6.
Good, okay.
Okay.
That's fine.
That, you know, that recognizing that going online would or could release staff.
I'm taking much
Is that
longer.
okay?
Everyone happy with it?
Yes, that's fine.
Sorry.
Just one point as well. Do you see and I agree with it, the more detailed engagement with stakeholders. Will we try to sort of test a bit of urgency into that from the department and maybe find out what they're proposing to do? And I don't know, maybe, I know we have a tight workload here, but is there any merit in us maybe trying to help some way? Because I know certainly the DRD committee there, you know, we would have done a little bit of extra consultation with stakeholders around the off-street parking, and we visited Fermanagh last week, you know, at the council. Maybe
This is more internal, isn't it, than the other would have been?
it's about soliciting their views, more engagement with stakeholders around that particular limit. I'm just talking about those precedent here.
Yeah.
But is it, maybe we don't need to do that. But
I mean, the executive are meeting because it is the first week in January, so you know, maybe it's a longer term thing.
The committee hasn't started the dairy fair, no?
No.
You get plenty of views there and stakeholders' opinions.
You would. You might get out of it.
I do think it's important. And there was a stakeholder event here today regarding rural transport, you know, and certainly that was a point that I said to them, you know, that we do need to make our views known by 29th of December. You know.
Yep.
Meet the farmers.
Indeed, that, but Declan saying there, something maybe can we take it up under any other business?
Well, next week we'll be looking at the forward work programme for January to Easter, so maybe that's the piece to bring it up then.
What day?
Next Tuesday, the meeting next Tuesday.
Well, maybe if we, under any other business, we can bring that up, it can go on the CLAR for next week.
Oh, yeah, I have that down in the, sorry, but down to write to the Minister on that.
Maybe it'd be important for us to get some information from the department about the extent of their consultation with stakeholders, you know, just to see how extensive this has been.
Separate to this, then I'm going to write to DARD asking for what consultation and interaction it had with stakeholders. Yeah. Beyond just getting a written response.
Everyone happy now?
Mhm.
That's letter complete.
Okay.
Okay? Okay.
You might want to pass.
Yes, there will be debate. The Committee for Finance Personnel will hold a take note debate on the budget on the 12th of January, and I will represent the committee views in that debate. Okay. Members content that the responses issued to the Committee of Finance Personnel and copy to the Department. That's okay. Can I refer members to table paper from the ETI Committee on cuts to the farm safety campaign? I have some concerns in that regard. We had a farmer in Fermanagh lost his life just yesterday, the day before, I think, was it Bull, Mr. Robert Brown. Indeed, there was 2 farmers just across the border in Donegal lost their lives with a terrible
I proposed that.
a few days ago.
Yeah.
So, what is members' feelings on that?
I propose that that's put back in again. What sort of money spent on it?
I'm not sure. We haven't got the copy of it. What's spent on?
We can find out how much.
Should we write to the NETI Committee reflecting views? What are the views of the committee? That's the bottom line.
I don't think you can put a price on life. What you say yourself, Chair. And I think it's very hard to put a price on life. So, in that sense, there.
We have a disappointed. That we have a good right letter to. Disappointed.
Very much so.
Sure, we can be disappointed all we want. Do we want them to do anything?
Can we make them?
Well, we can't make them, but we can put our view,
stronger,
we can put our view over with that we think it should be retained.
Yeah.
It's very worrying, Chair, actually, that they are going to suspend it as well, given the
I
fact.
propose we write in the terms that we recommend that they it should be retained.
Yeah, I think
that,
it should be, yeah.
Okay.
But okay. That's given the ongoing death on farms. Agenda item 11, correspondence. Can I refer members to the correspondence received at pages 232 to 238. Are members content to action the correspondence as suggested on the index sheet at page 231?
Great.
Yeah, members?
Great.
Agenda item 12,
Sure,
Part 1
sorry,
programme.
just on that particular, sorry for holding it there on that correspondence from the Farmers Union. That issue, did it come specifically before us, or was it combined with a number of other issues in that cross-compliance stuff?
You might want to look at also the letter from Under Matters Arising. We dealt with
Yes.
this earlier on.
That's an issue that we, yeah.
Under Matters Arising, the letter there.
Yeah, I might have raised that issue. On the tagging issue?
Yeah, my tablet's not working. Can't get it to.
Which one was that? What letter from?
I think it's the last letter under Matters Arising.
Page
My tablet's broken there. It's not
What are we saying? We'll just find out.
Page.
Matters Arising.
It is the my tablet's broken. Go back to the paper copy.
Oh yeah, from
232 to 238.
Yeah.
It is. I've had a number of farmers have raised this issue with me as well. It's an issue around the fact that the department here allows for once you've over 20 missing tags in any herd, irrespective of the size, you're then in cross-compliance penalty. For instance, if you've over 20 tags, if you have 200 cattle and you have 20 tags, which is 10%, there's no penalty. But if you had 800, I had one farmer with 850 cattle and he had 23 tags missing, and he therefore was in a cross-compliance penalty. Now, you look at England, Scotland, and Wales, and we have a response here from giving you how I think Scotland has a 16% latitude in relation to missing tags. I think the issue for us is, Tom, and for the committee, it doesn't seem to be fair and equal in that if you have a larger herd, if you had 800 cattle, you're only allowed 2.5%, whereas if you had 200 cattle, you have 10% leeway in the number of tags that you're allowed missing before a fine.
Chairman, I'm trying to establish, is that going to come in from this year?
It's already come in. They have already brought that in.
Right.
Last spring, in March or April time. Do you see, originally you had 28 days to replace tags.
Yeah.
And if you done that within 28 days, there was no cross-compliance.
Yeah.
Now, if you have over 20 missing tags in one herd, irrespective of the size of the herd, and that's the difficulty I see. I think it's not equality, because if you have a smaller herd with a smaller number of animals, you're allowed a much bigger latitude in relation.
It's been in for a year now.
Not a year yet.
1st of January
Springtime.
2014.
It's only coming into place.
Was there consultation at that time, or did they just bring it in?
It's been since the 1st of January 2014.
Yeah.
It doesn't say.
But it never, yeah.
Might be useful to ask what consultation there was at the time.
I think we should go to the Department of a fairly strong manner on this one. I think if you look at Scotland and other areas, I think there's some more.
It's really great.
See, once we go to the Department, they tell us this is rules from Europe. But then when you look at other areas of the UK, don't seem to be.
It's how they're interpreted.
Yeah, it's how they're interpreted.
They'd agreed earlier on to, or a letter to go to the Minister on this, and I'll add in about finding out what consultation there was on that issue.
He's happy to present a letter then to the Minister on this? Okay?
Yeah.
Here? Okay.
Jared, it does set a broader precedent in that we were under pressure here, was it last week or the week before, to approve the cross-compliance stuff. And one aspect that I know Edwin Poots raised it, and I raised it, and not at all happy, and that is that you have to get permission for the removal of a single tree out of a hedgerow. And it doesn't matter what the species is, you know, even if it's a Sitka spruce or something. And I have to say, it's really, really going to be, it's going to come back and bite us, that one. But we were under pressure last week to
They said they'd come back and look at a number of the issues in the new year.
I think we should put that on the agenda, both of these aspects on the agenda for the new year.
Yeah.
For
they did assure us that they would do that. Yeah. And especially one in particular, which one was it that they had promised us? There's one in particular that.
Anyway, over the Christmas break, maybe the cleric would look through all that stuff.
I'm sure the cleric will not get a break for that.
Come up with all those issues.
Letters, I'll send you writing letters.
Okay, and we move on to agenda item 12, forward work programme. Can I refer members to the forward work programme at page 241 to 243? Advise members that a number of SL1s have been deferred to the next session at the request of the department. Can I seek agreement for the forward work programme? Okay.
Chairman, on that there, that meeting today with the rural community transport, I think that they are looking maybe to make a presentation on our evidence gathering.
We're looking forward to that till, isn't it okay?
They write into the...
You need to write into the form, you write into the committee, and then it comes to the committee, and the committee makes a decision.
Okay. Okay, agenda item 13, any other business? Is there any other business?
No, was it?
Agenda item 14, date and time of next meeting. The next meeting of the Agriculture and Rural Development Committee will take place on Tuesday, 9th of December 2014 at 1:30 p.m. in room 30, Parliament Buildings. I declare the meeting is adjourned.
What's the email, Committee?